Good morning. Sorry, we're just waiting for a couple more people and having some technical problems here with speaker management. Good morning. My name is Lene Palmisano, and this is our budget markup session. Today, November 30th, 2018, I'm joined here at the dais by Vice Chair of this committee, Councilmember Steve Fletcher, and also Councilmembers Gordon, Cano, Reich, Bender, Schrader, Ellison, Goodman, and Cunningham. Councilmember Andrew Johnson, due to medical reasons, unfortunately cannot join us today. But we do have plenty more than a quorum and are authorized to do the work to mark up Mayor Fry's 2019 recommended budget. Colleagues, before you do have a resolution packet. It looks like this. It doesn't have any big documents on it. That's great. We will deal with that next Wednesday, but you can put that aside. What we are going to be doing is going in the order of council amendments that Councilmember Fletcher, myself, and Director Intermill put together yesterday evening. The intent behind this order is to not supplant other people's sources of funds. That's the only logic to this order. That way, things can pass or fail based on their own merits without supplanting other people's things that they are bringing forward. Director Intermill, did you want to say a few words about this year's budget? I'm sorry we didn't cover that off.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Micah Intermill, City Budget Director. If it's the will of the committee, I'll just go ahead now, say a few brief remarks about our process for the year and then go through the technical amendment. Seeing no objections, thank you for this opportunity to present the set of technical amendments. I'll try to be thorough yet brief in my discussion of each item. Before I do that, I do want to take this opportunity to recognize those who helped us get here today. First, I want to recognize our CFO, Mark Ruff, and Deputy CFO, Lori Johnson, who truly expertly lead our city's financial operation. Our Director of Capital, Debt, and Investments, Mike Ablin, stewards the CLIC process and capital budget development, along with the support of Jeff Metzen. And of course, none of this would come together without our team of capable budget analysts, Robert Harrison, Gina Powell, Brad Honnell, and Jeffrey Marguri, or without the steady accounting staff led by Lyle Hodges. All of whom work hard each year to ensure our dollars are being spent both appropriately as well as in accordance with council and mayor intent. Sorry, I've been struggling with the same cold for like 2 months because I have a young child at home. Our committee clerk, Kelly Giesler, has kept us on track all year. Casey Carl and Jackie Hansen have prepared us well for a successful markup and adoption. Every department devotes countless hours to the budget throughout the year. I'll stop naming names in all cases but one. MPD Finance Director Robin McPherson truly goes above and beyond, not only on budget development, but in supporting the financial and administrative operations of the MPD. Finally, I do want to extend my thanks to all of you and your staff, the mayor and his team. It takes time and energy to dig in, understand where the dollars come from, where they go to, how to leverage those dollars to affect the outcomes that Minneapolis residents, businesses, and visitors expect, desire, and demand. You, our elected officials, have introduced additional transparency and opportunities for the public to engage this year, and the process has been and outcomes will be better for that. It's been a long week in this chamber, so I will stop there, but it truly does take a village to get this done, so thank you. So at this point, I will review each item on the technical amendment number 1 in the order that they're listed. Please stop me at any point if you have questions. Item A is correcting the 2024 bond levy figure in the 5-year financial direction. This is purely correcting an error in developing the book. A wrong number was entered, and this corrects for that. Item B incorporates action taken by council that occurred earlier this year, but after the publication of the mayor's recommendation to extend the consolidated TIF district through the end of 2019. This also authorizes early retirement of the Target Center debt. This action does not change any payments to neighborhood groups. Item C adjusts the pooled TIF sources used to fund a large portion of the recommended investments in the affordable housing package proposed by the mayor. Mark Winkelhake, our Director of Development Finance, made these adjustments after rechecking his work. Item D corrects the Solid Waste and Recycling Fund financial plan to conform with the General Fund 5-year financial direction. This relates to a $325,000 annual transfer, which is fixed at that amount for graffiti removal each year. Item E corrects for an error in naming the pension fund transfer schedule. This simply reflects council's original intent to recall a general fund backstop that is no longer needed in the pension funds. I think we've discussed that at length. Item F reduces revenues and expenses associated with providing accounting services to the Municipal Building Commission, or MBC. Earlier this year, MBC chose to hire that function in-house, so we're no longer charging the MBC for that work, nor employing an accountant to do that work. The reduction in staff was handled through attrition, and the separation between the city and MBC for the work was amicable. Item G moves anticipated multi-year expenditures from the general fund to a special revenue fund. This treatment is favored from a financial management standpoint as it relates to our fund balance and contingency requirements, and it better reflects policymaker intent. Item H corrects for an omission. We will begin paying the debt borrowed earlier this year for construction of the new office building next year. Funds have been collected in the Property Services Fund, but we didn't make a corresponding transfer to the debt funds to make the payment. Item I corrects for changes related to bond sales that occurred after the publishing of the mayor's recommended budget book. Our team makes our best assumptions, but each year we need to make adjustments once we know what debt has been issued. If you have specific questions about any of that, Mike Abelin is happy to explain. And item J simply adjusts the payment of debt service for bonds taken out to finance improvements to the impound lot, as cash is the intended source for that payment. Items K through V. So in total, all of those items reflect the Final Four agreement, which council approved and mayor signed off on earlier this year. That action happened after the mayor made his recommendation on the budget, and as the expenditures will occur next year, we need to just incorporate them into the document. This authorizes expenditures agreed to be reimbursed by the host committee, and it reflects revenues associated with that agreement. Items W through AV, again, a big chunk, reflect the two amendments the mayor made on November 16th of this year to his initial recommendation on August 15th of 2018. The first is purely technical, directing staff to correctly reflect the mayor's intent for the Stable Homes, Stable Schools change item to recur for years 2020 and 2021, and to reflect the fact that general one-time change item spending of $8 million each year will be reduced by the same amount. So in total, still spending $8 million on one-time items, just specifically calling out that $3.35 million will be spent for Stable Homes, Stable Schools. The second component of that amendment package is substantive, making changes to the computer-aided mass appraisal change item, or CAMA, providing ongoing funding for this system so that work can begin early next year, and paying for that ongoing spending by first eliminating the principal appraiser change item from the assessor recommendation, second eliminating the operating budget adjustment change item for the assessor, and third, making modest cuts to all departments which receive general fund dollars for IT expenditures by between $1,000 to $10,000, depending on their level of general fund support. It's left to department discretion as to how they absorb this operating budget cut. Finally, The language at the top of the amendment provides for staff to make any additional tweaks made necessary by amendments made today or next week, or if there are any other minor errors we've missed. Are there any questions on items A through AV?
Are there any questions on the technical amendment for staff? It doesn't look like there are.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll ask for a voice vote. All those in favor of approving the technical amendment from the chair for the 2019 recommended budget, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Item number 2 is a renter support amendment, and it will be explained and brought forward by Councilmembers Bender and Ellison, and Councilmember Bender will speak with that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think most council members, especially the ones on the HPD and EDRS committee, know that we've been talking about ways that we can better support renters through legal protection. And I'll be brief, but I want to make 2 points about this. Number one is that if we are to see the impact of the new regulations and the existing laws that we have that protect renters from eviction and to make sure that they're living in safe housing that is in well repair, we really need to invest in enforcement. And the enforcement of these policies are really through the courts. And there have been some pilot work done through city funds, county funds, and foundations. The Pollad Foundation and others have invested in pilots that look at the impact of having legal protection for renters in the courts, and it is dramatic. Low-income renters that have a lawyer or other legal services like mediation in the courts have much better outcomes. They're much less likely to be evicted. If they are needing to leave their home, they have more time to move. And there's also been a lot of success in getting eviction filings called UDs, or unlawful detainers, off people's records. And we've heard so many compelling stories about the impact of having a UD on your record and how hard that makes it to get into housing in the future. So this is a pretty, given the scope of the investment in housing this year, a pretty modest shift from the trust fund into a fund that would go to augment the amount of money that we are providing for renters to have legal protection. We've put it in the city coordinator's office as kind of a placeholder. We know that our staff in regulatory services, in the housing section of CPED, and in the city attorney's office all touch this work. So that will just be a matter of deciding who will be managing these contracts. But for now, we've placed it in the city coordinator's office. And I think Councilmember Ellison and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Comment or question from Councilmember Gordon?
Thank you very much, Chair. I think this sounds great. I'm just a little bit confused about what's actually happening when I'm reading the amendment. So it says we're amending the budget for Regulatory Services Department on a one-time basis. But then the money seems to be, we're increasing, and then I think it's for increasing the revenue budget, not in, but for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund change item by $500,000. Does the $500,000 then come out of the Regulatory Services Department's budget? And if so, from what?
Mike is going to answer your question. I think it's
Director Innermill?
Councilmember, Madam Chair, I apologize. This amendment went through a few iterations, and I see a number of errors. So let me try and correct for the Council President's intent on the fly. So I recommend, if the Council President agrees, we correct this motion to read, amending the 2019 Mayor's recommended budget for the City Coordinator and Community Planning and Economic Development CPED departments on a one-time basis, reducing the expenditure budget for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund change item in CPED by $500,000, and creating a new renter support change item in City Coordinator. The City Coordinator shall enter into contracts totaling at least $500,000 to provide mediation and legal support services for low-income renters facing eviction. The appropriation in City Coordinator is one time only. So the intent of this amendment, as I understand it from the Council President, and again, I would like her to correct me if I'm wrong, but is to move $500,000 from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund change item to the city coordinator's office for this renter support item. Again, the initial recommendation from the mayor was for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund dollars to be one time, and the renter support item is one time.
I appreciate that a great deal. Now that it's much more clear, I understand we're taking money from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to support another housing effort. I think it makes sense. There's a real nexus there. And I'd be comfortable with it either in the city coordinator or in reg services. And I understand the council president is saying city coordinator will likely work with reg services and others to get this done. So thanks for letting me get some clarity on the amendment.
Thank you. Councilmember Schrader?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be supporting this, but I don't like taking money from housing for other types of housing. We need all of it. We definitely need every penny we can get in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And that said, you know, I commend Councilmember Bender and Ellison for just pointing out the great need. So I will be supporting this, but I hope we can find new money in future budgets.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also supporting this today. I want to say two things about it. With regard to where it lies, given that our Regulatory Services Director has just departed, that we're working on a complete redo of our rental housing licensing and inspection system that poor Kim Keller is going to have to be dealing with. It makes sense for right now for it to be in the coordinator's office, but I don't think over time it should be. Then I'll also just note, and I know you know this, so I don't say this to lecture anybody, but people who are facing eviction who go to housing court have an 80% better chance of getting an outcome that will allow them to stay in their housing than if they don't have some sort of lawyer, volunteer, or otherwise. So as we look at what we're trying to do with very low-income renters in the bigger scheme of things, trying to keep them where they are costs us a lot less than actually trying to continue to build new housing at those lower levels. And so I think as we continue to try to have a very multifaceted approach to this problem, making sure that people who are in housing court have some level of representation makes sense. The mayor has made a lot of great progress with getting volunteer lawyers to help with this, but that's only going to last for a certain amount of time too. I think we need to have some sort of system in place, a safety net, as I would say, to make sure that we can keep people in their houses. That costs a lot less than $25,000 to $35,000 per unit we're currently subsidizing developers to build affordable housing.
Thank you. I put myself in queue just to ask one question. I appreciate that the intent of this is to move it to the city coordinator's office, and I was just curious, is there a specific role or person in the department that would then manage this money? Is that an amendment coming later? I'm just curious, and I guess I'll yield that question to the others.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a great question. Frankly, I think in the next year, we could benefit from formalizing what has become an informal group of staff that are working on renter protection. So, of course, our housing director, Andrea Brennan, staff from regulatory services, whether the director or someone that has been sent by the regulatory services department. In the coordinator's office, it has been the deputy city coordinator that has been helping out with this work. And then, of course, the city attorney's office as well. So I would imagine that given what's happening so far with that staff team that's working very closely together and very collaboratively on policy change and frankly, the kind of internal work that Councilmember Goodman described, that it would be Danielle, the deputy city coordinator, who would be the staff person coordinating with regulatory service, CPED, and the city attorney's office.
Thank you. Councilmember Ellison.
Want to thank the Council President for all the work and for answering that last question. And just wanted to put in perspective for folks that when we were, as we've been digging into this issue and talking to legal experts, there's some estimations that if we wanted to give folks in Minneapolis, renters in Minneapolis, a right to counsel, that means every renter in housing court was covered. That would cost somewhere between $4 and $5 million, right? And so I think that this is is a huge effort in the right direction, but by no means does it get us where we need to go. And just wanted to put that in perspective, just because sometimes $500,000 can sound like a lot, but wanted to put in perspective what we're putting forward with regards to what the need is. So.
Thank you. The city clerk just emailed all council members and staff that amended version of number 2 that's in front of you. I'm going to read it and then ask one more time if there's any questions or thoughts, just so that it's here on video. The amended motion is amending the 2019 mayor's recommended budget for the city coordinator and community planning and economic development departments on a one-time basis, reducing the expenditure budget for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in CPED by $500,000 and creating a new renter support change item in the city coordinator's office. The city coordinator shall enter into contracts totaling at least $500,000 to provide mediation and legal support services for low-income renters facing eviction. The appropriation in city coordinator's office is one time only. I think that with the city clerk, I don't think we need to take a vote to amend this. We're just moving it forward as I've just stated. Are there any further questions or comments from people? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. For item number 3, I'll turn this over to the council president, and she might be turning it over to Councilmember Ellison.
Yes, Councilmember Ellison will make this motion.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are going to be, I will just read the amendment as written here. This is a motion amending the 2019 mayor's recommended budget for the Regulatory Services Department, increasing the revenue budget in the rental repair revolving fund by $2 million and increasing the expenditure budget in the rental repair revolving fund by $2 million. Regulatory services and finance and property services staff are directed to report back by January 31st, 2019 with policy guidelines on use of the rental repair revolving fund. Guidelines should address eligibility criteria and appropriate expenditure of funds. And so just to give a little bit of context for why I felt like this is necessary, not to get too anecdotal, but, when I first got in office, the whole city, myself included, inherited some TRAs, both in the Steve French portfolio and the Markup portfolio. And what we found was, as we were trying to support renters, we were, finding ourselves engaged in these TRAs after license revocation had already happened, and really unable to bring a lot of these properties up to code, up to livability. And this fund, I think, would really give us a lot more room to support tenants who are engaged in a TRA, which is a tenant remedies action, and hopefully allow us and equip us to pursue TRAs before license revocation. And so that's the purpose, and I'll stand for any other questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to add a little context too, Councilmember Ellison and I are working together on what we're calling a Renters First policy that will come through the EDRS committee early next year in coordination with Councilmember Goodman, the chair of that committee. And this is really our one of a set of things that the city is doing to make sure that we are going after problem landlords earlier in the sort of progression of disrepair. So these properties that were owned by friends and Con should never have gotten into the state they were. And it's very expensive for the city to go through this license revocation process, which has huge impacts on our constituents who are then becoming displaced from their homes. And then doing the work to try to make sure that we find people housing. I mean, Councilmember Ellison and Goodman work together to try to help these renters that were getting displaced, but we need to do a much better job of going upstream and making sure that rental properties never get into that state in the first place. And the Renter First policy that we're working on with Reg Services and the other departments mentioned will really state that rental housing in our city is an asset that we need to make sure is well maintained. In a city that has over half of our constituents who are renting, we need to make sure that rental housing stock is safe for people to be living in. And so this will allow us, it's really a budget neutral thing over the long term because we get this money back. So this is money that the city puts into repairing housing when needed, when we're bringing tenant remedy actions against problem landlords. And then we get the money back from the landlord through the courts or through a mediation process. So this will allow us to start, again, to bring these tenant remedy actions earlier on behalf of renters in our city who are living in rental properties that are in decline. I just want to thank Councilmember Ellison for his leadership in this. His ward, along with the fourth ward, are very heavily impacted by this, and I think we're going to see a big difference by making some of these upstream investments.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I just want to express my enthusiastic support for this idea. As a community organizer and a housing advocate many years ago, I saw firsthand so many cases where this would have prevented displacement. And so having the ability to make repairs while someone's still living in it and maintain homes as habitable so that people aren't displaced in the first place is a really important idea and a really important thing for us to invest real money in. And so I really appreciate this initiative. Thank you for your work on this.
Great. Councilmember Kano?
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering if the staff could help me get a sense of what is the current level of funding in the rental repair revolving fund. I'm supporting this amendment. I would just love to know, like, how much money is there now, and like where is it going? How much money did we use this year? Because a $2 million increase is amazing, and I'm just curious if like the current rental repair revolving fund has like $100,000 in it, $200,000. How often is it used this year? How much money do landlords get taxed on this? And like, are we expecting an increase in taxing for them in the next round? It's just all information that I just would like to know. I'm definitely supportive of this motion, but would love to just find out what's the current balance in the rental repair revolving fund.
That's a good question. Director Intraman?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Kano, all good questions. So let me try and address all of them, and if I miss any, I trust you'll let me know.
Yep.
So earlier this year, the fund started with $160,000 available. $80,000 approximately has been used this year, leaving a balance of $80,000 to be used in the future were this amendment not included. This amendment would increase then roughly on January 1, there would be $2,080,000 available to make these rental repairs. And so the fund then, much like street assessments, dollars are put out and then recouped. That's the revolving part of this revolving fund. Dollars are recouped through assessing the cost of those repairs back to the owners of the properties. So there would not necessarily be a tax increase, but there would be property tax assessments levied against those owners for the repairs to their buildings.
Do you know if we have a policy that prevents that increase from being passed down to renters in the form of increased rents?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Kano, right now the policy with regard to the use of this fund is purely laid out in ordinance. As required in this amendment, though, staff from Finance and Property Services and Regulatory Services is required to come back with stronger policy considerations, I believe precisely because the amendment increases the available funds by 10-fold. The goal is to have some stronger policy language around that. So staff will be putting together that policy language. Whether or not it will include any prohibitions is yet to be seen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Director Intramural. Councilmember Ellison.
I know that Mr. Intramural just kind of explained this, but we've got some questions from my colleagues about why we're deciding to structure the fund in this way, and would you be able to kind of give some context to that, just to kind of reassure folks that about where the money's coming from and the prospect that we get it back.
Director Intramural, did you want to answer that, or perhaps?
I'll turn it over to Mr. Ruff. I think he'd be better suited.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Ruff.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Ellison, I can understand some of the uncertainty about this. I would say we have a couple of analogous situations in the city. One would be, for example, housing improvement areas, where there are assessment-like charges for a housing development. There is a process laid out in state law for that, but the city has a policy on top of that in terms of our level of process and security that would be necessary for what is essentially a financing, as Director Enemo referred to. And I think that is where we are encouraging council at this time to focus the energy into developing this policy so that you can all be assured of, for example, how much per unit would be allocated as a maximum, what the term of repayment would be, what implications, as Councilmember Cano mentioned, would have upon rents. So at least from our perspective and finance perspective, this is simply an authorization of these funds, but we are not going to move forward with any allocation of funds until these policies are developed and you as a council can have some understanding about when we would be repaid, how would we be repaid, and what risks would come with that for both the city and for renters.
Thank you. I think that's a really good way to think of it. This is the authority to use up to that much money as policy gets developed for it. Councilmember Ellison, are you done? Yeah, I'm done. Yeah, thank you. Councilmember Gordon.
So just to be clear, I guess that we can take some comfort because we're saying we're going to increase the revenue budget in the rental repair revolving fund, which means we're going to allow them to accept and keep in the fund up to $2 million. We're not actually front loading the fund January 1 at all. It's still going to have the $80,000 in it to work with, but as those assessments get paid back, and as the policy gets developed, we will allow the revenue, that fund, to collect revenues and keep them in the program up to $2 million. So with that kind of understanding, I think I'm supportive of this idea, but I think we're all smart to think we want to see the guidelines and the policy written out and weigh in and clarify that as it goes forward.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's exactly what I was going to say. Unlike other things in the budget, this actually says, please come back to us by this date and tell us what the program objectives are and how this is going to operate, and please weigh in on the specifics, because there are a few things I have concerns about. I would not call this comparable to the housing improvement district. Housing improvement districts are voluntary, where the building has a bunch of problems, the neighbors have to sign, like 75% of all the neighbors have to sign, and then they get assessed to fix the repairs. In this situation, you have bad landlords who don't want to make the repairs. So we're coming in to do it for them, and we don't want them to benefit. We don't want property owners to turn around and let tuck pointing go or allow major structural problems to happen and then say, hey, we'll come in and fix it. The most important thing is we'll come in and fix it because you're screwing your tenants and we're going to have to come back and assess you for it. So those things are not comparable. One's voluntarily, one's not. But in the end, the important thing is that EDRS and housing policy will come back and talk about these things and talk about how it's going to work, because when we spend money in the city council's responsibility is to have program guidelines and weigh in on how these things happen. We're not just a grant maker. And this will come up in other parts of our discussion today, too. I think it's important for people to feel open to start new programs without the support of staff, but then we have to have staff intervene to give us a sense of how we can make this happen. And so I do think that this is probably something we need to do as long as we're conscious of not rewarding bad landlords by fixing their property for them.
I appreciate that. I think Councilmember Bender has some answers to that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I really appreciate all of these questions and comments. I think there are things that Councilmember Ellison and I have been talking about with staff and are all right on. I mean, a couple of comments to make. This fund exists and there isn't currently a policy in place. So it has been used recently on some of these problem landlords without the kind of policy that we're talking about having. So in fact, I think Councilmember Ellison and I, when we weighed whether or not to bring this as a budget amendment or just kind of handle it next year more administratively, we really wanted to have the transparency of bringing it in this way, because we are actually involved currently in developing 2 potential tenant remedy actions that could rely on funds like this. So I think it just gives us a chance to be proactive as a council in recognizing that these kinds of funds are likely to be needed in the near future, next year. And also, even though this is a pretty aggressive timeline for staff, so thank you, it's asking them to come back very early next year with an update on the kinds of policies that we could have in place to decide when we want to use these. And I think that will give us the chance to address a lot of the concerns that council members are raising about the policy issues around problem properties. So Councilmember Kano's point about how do we best support renters who are living in buildings that are low rent because they've been in disrepair, and how do we make sure that we're not when we make sure that people are living in safe, quality housing, that we're not then also ignoring the part about rents rising. And we have a lot of strategies in place to try to support renters in that scenario, but I agree we need to make sure that that is part of this program and all programs that we're talking about with problem rental properties. So I guess I would just end with kind of an open invitation to work with Councilmember Ellison and I on, shaping this program and the related work that's happening in regulatory services and housing.
Thank you, Councilmember Kano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, really supportive of this. Really appreciate just the bold step forward on this. I did just send an email to staff to see if we can make sure that this is aligned with our city's efforts to meet our racial equity goals around contracting, because if the city uses this rental repair revolving fund to hire folks to go make repairs on buildings that are either being neglected by landlords or other issues, it would be great to make sure that the folks who are being hired to do those repairs are in line with our city's goals of diversifying our contractor pool, ensuring we're hiring locally, that we're hiring companies who are socially responsible, that don't have connections to oil pipelines and so forth, as well as making sure that they're paying, the living wage or minimum wage that we've set forward for the city. So just trying to make some connections here, but just really excited about this, and thanks to Councilmember Ellison and Council President Bender for bringing this forward.
Councilmember Warsame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like just to commend Council President Bender and Council Member Ellison for their work on both markup number 2 that we previously passed and number 3, and the fact that we are now, for the first time in a long time, putting a focus on renters. And as somebody who has, a ward that has 80% renters, and very diverse, working class, renters have never had this much attention. So I commend both the council members and look forward to partnering with them in the future.
Thank you, Councilmember Ellison.
And then the last thing I'll say, in addition to thanking all my colleagues for having interest in asking really good questions about this, is that I think that some of the concerns will, and I'll let the city attorney correct me if I'm wrong, but be sort of mitigated through the nature of the TRA, which is that when we enter into a TRA, rents are not collected by the landlord, and this, but also sometimes the rents themselves cannot cover the cost of the repairs needed, and this would give us some cushion to do that for renters who are being abused by their landlords. So, yeah, just want to name that.
Thank you. I think we're ready to vote on this item. All those in favor of the Bender-Ellison amendment for the rental repair revolving fund, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Next, we have item 4, Councilmember Bender's Violence Prevention Director position, and I'll turn it over to Council President to explain it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So actually, an amendment that went out by email earlier today covers both this, but significantly more funding. And so I'll just go ahead and move the motion that Councilmember Fletcher and Cunningham shared this morning, and then let them talk about that.
So if I'm not mistaken, that's the one that I just received here at the dais, and it looks like this. It's a legal sheet of paper. It says on the top, Fletcher Cunningham Public Safety Omnibus Amendment. Should I turn it over to Councilmember Fletcher? Go right ahead.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, and thank you, Council President Bender. for your work on this. In my conversations with colleagues, and I'll apologize for not getting this out sooner, we were making some final language adjustments. But in my conversations with colleagues, there were many of us who had inspiring ideas about violence prevention and community safety strategies that went beyond an investment in MPD. And as we looked at those things, it felt like it made sense to bring them together into a package. I will say that this amendment is not something that is the radical shift that some people asked for. What it does is the mayor's budget was providing a 2.8% increase to their budget. This would impact that to a 2.2% increase to the budget. I do think it's responsive to a lot of the community feedback that we received in the budget hearings, and so I'll present the motion as it's proposed. The motion by myself and Councilmember Cunningham is to amend the 2019 mayor's recommended budget for the police department, eliminating the civilianized existing sworn positions change item for police, including reducing the one-time appropriation by $179,000, reducing ongoing appropriation by $929,000, and reducing the proposed FTE by 8. Amending the 2019 mayor's recommended budget for the police department, reducing the this should read ongoing. I apologize. There's a mistake there. Appropriation for co-responder program by $188,000, and increasing the one-time appropriation for co-responder program by $348,000. The police department shall use these funds to expand the mental health co-responder program to all precincts in the city, including reassigning existing sworn officer positions to the program as necessary for a full expansion of the program to all precincts. Amending the 2019 mayor's recommended budget for the health department, increasing the one-time appropriation for the Office of Violence Prevention change item by $116,000, and adding an ongoing appropriation of $457,000, including one FTE, to the Office of Violence Prevention. With these resources, the health department shall establish a violence prevention fund and hire an FTE to manage the Office of Violence Prevention and expenditures from the fund. The Violence Prevention Fund shall be used to invest in community-led strategies that address violence in the community, domestic violence, community trauma and healing, and childhood trauma and adverse childhood experiences. At least $150,000 from the fund shall be designated specifically for community-based downtown safety strategies. The Health Department shall report back to Council on recommended use of these funds no later than April 30th, 2019. Amending the 2019 Mayor's recommended budget for the Health Department, reducing the one-time appropriation for the Next Step Youth Violence Prevention change item by $130,000, and increasing the ongoing appropriation for the Next Step Youth Violence Prevention change item by $130,000. Amending the 2019 Mayor's recommended budget for the Health Department, increasing the Health Department's appropriation by $40,000 one-time for a new Youth Coordinating Board change item. The Health Department shall direct these funds to the Youth Coordinating Board in support of part-time youth workers to work in the Cedar Riverside and Seward neighborhoods. Amending the 2019 Mayor's recommended budget for the City Attorney's Office, reducing the one-time appropriation for the Pathways community-based programming for gross misdemeanor weapons offenses change item by $35,000, and increasing the ongoing appropriation for the Pathways community-based programming for gross misdemeanor weapons offenses change item by $35,000. Amending the 2019 Mayor's recommended budget for the City Attorney's Office, reducing the one-time appropriation for the domestic violence outreach pilot by $60,000, and increasing the ongoing appropriation for that program by $60,000, and striking the word pilot from the name of the change item. Amending the 2019 Mayor's recommended budget for the Civil Rights Department, adding $100,000 ongoing, including one FTE, for a new Office of Police Conduct Review change item in the Civil Rights Department. The Civil Rights Department shall hire a case investigator in the Office of Police Conduct Review to fill this new position. Amending the 2019 Mayor's recommended budget for the Civil Rights Department, reducing the one-time appropriation for the Collaborative Enforcement Pilot change item by $100,000, and increasing the ongoing appropriation for the Collaborative Enforcement Pilot to $200,000. It should read to rather than by. Amending the 2019 Mayor's recommended budget for the City Coordinator's Office, increasing the ongoing appropriation for the Race and Equity Support change item by $100,000, and increasing the FTE added through the change item by 1. And amending the 2019 Mayor's recommended budget for the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department, increasing the ongoing appropriation for the Legal Services for Immigrants and Refugee Residents change item by $35,000.
Thank you. I'm going to note that I don't see anybody from I don't see Ms. McPherson in the room, but if I have a feeling there might be some questions later. If she, and she enters stage right. I just suppose that some of the people might have questions here. I will turn this over to Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So first off, I want to start with saying that I want to own the fact that I actually was the one who had originally asked the mayor to include these civilianized positions. And the reason why I did so was based on an analysis that it was fiscally responsible given the amount of overtime that officers are currently clocking. I had no idea when I made this original request that there were going to be 2 officer-involved shootings along with other major incidents in my ward in that time. And since then, I've had to really look at my decision around that request and focus on a cost-benefit analysis and really ask what is essentially needed and what were just things that were wants. The Office of Violence Prevention is not a want. It is critically necessary. Research tells us that the greater intensity of the interventions, the larger reduction we see in crime and violence. We must spend time investing in our prevention and intervention efforts that our health department, MPD, and community groups are working on and that are working. We cannot continue to be short-sighted and fund situation-based crime prevention strategies and traditional enforcement. This is an opportunity to establish a national best practice, focus on our youth, and prevent these atrocities from happening in the first place, as well as intervening when we see the warning signs of trouble. I want to name that when we look at the investments that are being transferred over, that they are all still focused on safety. To be clear that we are focusing on a broader analysis of what public safety looks like. Also, this amendment, we believe, aligns with our values here in Minneapolis of equity, safety, health, vitality, connectedness, and most importantly, thinking of growth from the perspective of how our government thinks and what safety investments truly are. This was a tough decision for me to be able to make, and because of the fact that, like I said, I originally was the one who requested it, but it felt absolutely necessary for me to reevaluate it. I also want to name that I spoke to both the chief and the mayor about this change item prior to this, so they are not blindsided by it. The chief explained that he understood. Of course, he's a great guy, and also I spoke to the mayor as well. So I just wanted to let folks know that this wasn't a surprise. This wasn't, we were in conversation as well. So I hope that my colleagues will support this. I think we'll have the opportunity to think more long-term about public safety from a law enforcement specific perspective. We can have longer term conversations about that, but given what we've seen and given the evidence and the data, this feels like a good direction for us to look long term, more sustainably at violence prevention and public safety.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would say it is a blind side to some of us. So it might not be a blind side to the mayor's office, but I work in the office every day, and I have talked to Council Members Fletcher and Cunningham multiple times this week, and never was this mentioned. So it does seem like a blind side. There is nothing in this list of violence prevention initiatives that I don't support. I think all of those initiatives are good. What I don't support is not asking for these things in the budget and taking them out of the police, because that feels retaliatory, and clearly it is, since you only talked to the people that you wanted to get the votes. And I would say that that is a problem as it pertains to collaboration. We've had this incredible downtown safety initiative going on for the past 2 years, where the Downtown Council and the DID have worked in partnership with YouthLink and Mad Dads to provide programming on Hennepin Avenue for youth and youth of color, to try to figure out how we can give them not only something to do, but something to look forward to in terms of job training and access to jobs. That could have been something that was put into this, but it wasn't. Now these organizations are going to have to fight for the crumbs of something that might be left somewhere down the line. So I have myself been very actively involved in trying to figure out community-based crime prevention strategies. So to be blindsided like this and not have the biggest strategy going on downtown included, I think is really disrespectful overall, since none of these issues are any issues that I have any disagreement with. And shame on you for doing that.
Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am supportive of this effort, and I wanted to just say a couple of things and then ask a question. So I wanted to thank the mayor for making the, I believe, the money for legal services for immigrant and refugee residents one time into ongoing. That's a very big deal. A lot of us struggle to find ongoing sources to sustain efforts, and so it's a very good sign that that money is moving in that direction. And thanks to the council for adding a little bit more bulk of resources onto that plate. I will say that I want to encourage all of us as policymakers to think above and beyond legal services for how we engage with the immigrant rights conversation. And I know that we are in other ways, but I want to remind us that we did hire a director for the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. And I've been seeing in other cities, folks are rolling out a 25-point platform of how they're supporting the immigrant community and how they're stepping up on the plate of sanctuary cities. And I think that we have so much more to do in that realm above and beyond a legal construct, which right now we're likely not going to win if we don't utilize our resources and our platform to build movements that then change laws. And so it's really hard to win the legal framework right now with our immigrant community because currently there is no legal pathway for many of our families to be here. And so we can throw money at that problem, but it's sort of a Band-Aid. And I'm really anxious and eager to really put our Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs in a leadership position in the region, in the Midwest, and in the nation to make sure that we are thinking creatively and taking risks in how we advance that discussion through city resources in a way that builds up the power and strength of the immigrant rights movement nationally and locally to make sure that we are bringing forward ideas that go above and beyond helping lawyers connect with immigrant community members who may or may not win a legal case in court and might end up being deported at the end of the day. So just wanted to put a brief kind of note on that. Excited to see the race equity FTE. And then I just had a question about, so there's an allocation here around the Office of Violence Prevention, and I just wanted to better understand that, and maybe the lead authors of this initiative can help me. The main thing that I just want to make sure is being addressed through this, and I've talked to both of you about this, is we know that we've experienced and seen a lot more gun violence in the East African community, and that it oftentimes doesn't get brought up to our attention, and also that there's an unspoken sort of challenge within the same community around issues with drug and chemical dependency issues. And so I just wanted to make sure that that was still going to be met in the way that this is laid out, just because I know we had talked about collaborative safety strategies, program money, and then maybe more like community-based safety strategies. So I understand, the domestic violence outreach pilot. I understand the OPCR case investigator, which is very much needed and good. So I'm just trying to make sure that that need is still being met in these lists. So just wanted to confirm, and if you could just kind of walk me through how that would be addressed here.
I'm going to yield this question to Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think there are two answers to that. One is that I do think that the Violence Prevention Fund is intended to be available to community-based strategies for both for exactly the issues that you're raising. The other item in here that's a new item is the Youth Coordinating Board investment that's specifically in the Cedar Riverside and Seward neighborhoods, and I think that that's also responsive to some of the violence prevention need in that community. So that's what I would say. I would also yield to Councilmember Cunningham if he's got further answers on the Office of Violence Prevention component of that.
Yes, I would say that when we look at collaborative safety strategies, which is a piece of the funding which we kind of assume will be included since that's been happening now the past couple of years, those are the sort of strategies, much the same as we saw this past year, how that's one example of where there could be an investment. Perhaps if you would like a more explicit investment, we can talk about that for this upcoming week.
That would be great. I just wanted to make sure that that was still kind of part of the, the formula. And I will say that I think it would be beneficial if we could consider orchestrating a coordinated outreach effort to leverage funding from either the corporate sector or foundations to add more dollars to the table. I think this is a pretty significant, unique move, and we should try to figure out if we can get some excitement around building up these resources by having a coordinated ask to bring folks to the table, and I'm sure there's a department within the city that helps with that, so we can tap that. So thank you for bringing this up.
If it's all right with Councilmember Jenkins, I'd like to pause and get some clarification for the impact of this from police finance. Is that all right with you? Ms. McPherson, I just want to make sure, if you have this motion in front of you.
I do.
The overall impact of this for the police department, different from the mayor's proposed budget, would be a reduction of 8 sworn officers back into the force, not because they would be reduced from the overall budget, but because they would be at these jobs that were going to be civilianized. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Plus, the other piece in here is about the mental health co-responder program and ensuring that it goes out to all precincts in the city. Yesterday at the Public Safety Committee, we learned that it takes sworn FTEs to be moved into those programs in order to run those programs in each precinct. I believe it was 2 sworn officers per co-responder. Is that your understanding?
It would be one officer per. So we would need, there were 3 that were originally earmarked to go towards the co-responder program. So if we went to 5 precincts for the co-responder program, we would need a total of 2 additional officers to go to those precincts.
Okay, and then in addition to that, what other impacts would this have to the police department?
Thank you very much for asking, Committee Chair. I appreciate it, and council members. So in determining the civilianization change request, there were a couple of considerations that were made. Probably the first and foremost that I think is known pretty much throughout the community is that we have a lack of investigators in the investigations department or unit. And so one of the ideas was to take those people who are being freed up and putting those in primarily investigations, and also knowing that the co-responder program may be enhanced. So the ability to take those officers and put them in where their core competencies are was very attractive to us. The other thing is, the couple other considerations that were made is that this is, we felt, the most cost-effective of limited resources that we know are out there to increase the number of officers who are actually working in law enforcement positions. The positions that they're in right now would very much are civilian positions, and were civilian positions initially. We want our civilian positions to be filled with civilians for a couple of reasons. One is the professional aspect of several of these jobs, especially in the crime lab, as well as the cost considerations. An officer compared to a civilian position is significantly higher. In fact, in our department, the average officer position is $28,000 more than a civilian position on average. So there is a significant cost implication in filling some of our civilian positions with sworn staff.
And Ms. McPherson, if I could interrupt you there, why is that the case? Is it because of different kinds of pensions or benefits, or what makes up that $28,000?
The biggest issue is actually just base wage.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was pretty much done. But again, we know that we have a need in our investigative unit specifically, and that is a need that we have been trying to fill as best as we can, but it does impact greatly our operations in those units.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the speaker queue and call on Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. So I am generally supportive of this amendment, and certainly pleased to see the emphasis on race equity and commitment to alternative ways of thinking about safety in our community, particularly from a community-based standpoint. I am concerned about investigators, particularly around the sexual violence issues that are in our city and that have not been able, for whatever reasons, to be addressed. And so would ask my colleagues to really consider, and the police department, how can we increase investigations around these pernicious, violent activities. So if there is a way that investigations can be included in the Office of Violence Prevention and sexual violence as a priority within that office, included in that analysis around violence in our community, I can be supportive of this amendment.
Ms. McPherson, I'm not sure you're the correct person from the police department to ask about this, but I will, and we can get somebody else up here if need be. But I believe the crux of Councilmember Jenkins' question is, can we do investigations through the health department?
Committee Chair Palmisano, I'm not the best person to ask that, and I would ask, DC Force is in office today, and I think if I could ask him to come up, that would be great. I will have to send him a text to do that. But I think that would be, just from what limited I know, I think that would be very difficult to do. They don't have the same training. They do not have the same legal aspect of things that I think is probably the biggest issue. But again, DC Force would be the best to ask, and I will ask him to come up.
If you would be, I don't know that anybody else up here needs you, but if you, when you sit down, could try and get somebody else up here, we'll table that, and there's more people in the queue, and hopefully he'll get here by the time we get through it. I will do that. Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be supporting this amendment, and I just want to thank and commend Council members Fletcher and Cunningham for drafting an amendment that really reflects a lot of the concerns of us up here. In my ward, my residents are shocked by just what we've seen this year by the police department, and they're not happy with the pace of the change in the police department. And at the same time, in Ward 11, like many parts of the city, the response times when crime is happening, when the city residents need the police, is horrible, and that needs to change. We need to do better. And I think this amendment starts to strike the right balance by putting money toward community-based crime and violence prevention, and that's why I'll be supporting it.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also supportive of the amendment, and I want to use my time to really speak to the importance of creating this new Office of Violence Prevention, and thank Councilmember Cunningham for his leadership in this, and along with Councilmember Fletcher for putting together what I think is a very thoughtful package of changes that help us make a better investment in violence prevention. Since I took office, we've added millions of dollars to traditional policing, and we seem to have to always kind of scrap at the last minute to find money to invest in these upstream strategies that we know are working to create safety in our communities in collaboration with people who live in neighborhoods across the city. And I think having an Office of Violence Prevention with staff who's tasked with leading this will create significantly more sustainability and allow for a longer term strategy around violence prevention, rather than council members kind of coming in at the last minute during budget to try to create new programs, or, I myself have worked with some to put money in for domestic violence prevention, which I think is an important priority, but I think this approach will allow our staff to give us recommendations and to use an evidence-based approach to violence prevention and build off the amazing work that the health department has been doing in coordination with the police department, the city attorney's office, and others across the enterprise to invest in a supportive approach to violence prevention. So I'm very supportive of this, and I'm most excited actually about this where I want to highlight particularly item C, which is creating this fund to allow this office to bring us recommendations about community-based safety strategies, about the 4 kind of areas of violence prevention that Councilmember Cunningham has been naming. So I think that will cover a lot of the things that council members have been adding through budgets over the years. And that's not to say, you know, between now and Wednesday, certainly folks may have thoughts about this, but I think that item C is what's intended to cover a lot of the work that has been happening through budget amendments one by one over the past few years.
Councilmember Ellison.
I also wanted to voice that I'm going to be supporting this amendment, and a lot of what I was going to address was already just addressed by the council president. You know, but I just wanted to say that I think that it makes sense that we're still addressing public safety. You know, if this was just sort of taking things and throwing them at the wall willy-nilly, and we're going to be funding anything and you know and everything, that would maybe be one thing. But everything that's in this amendment still addresses public safety. But as the council president and various others have said, we're going upstream, and I do think, you know, it's frustrating when you represent wards like my own that do face some pretty tricky issues with regards to safety, to have residents who are at one time wanting to be able to lean into a safety strategy that they can believe in, but at the same time finding themselves increasingly feeling like they can't call the police. And so I think it's really important that we continue to go upstream. I think that these dollars are still addressing public safety, and that's appropriate. And I just want to commend the authors for working really hard. I know that Councilmember Cunningham gets pulled in a lot of different directions, facing similar issues in his ward as I am in Ward 5. And I appreciate Councilmembers Cunningham and Fletcher bringing this forward and the deep amount of research and diligence that you put into this. So thank you.
Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to hop on this celebration train for a little bit and say that I am very inspired by your work, Councilmember Cunningham. I feel like you have made really complex things work, and you definitely have gained the respect of many of us because we see just how dedicated you are to your ward, and so I think your work will speak volumes. And I will say that for me, this is sort of lifts a burden on my shoulders because so many of my residents have been asking about the Collaborative Safety Strategies program, and part of the challenge is that that program, like some other programs, kind of come and go depending on the cohort of leaders that are elected. And so it's hard for some of those programs to show measurable impact and outcomes that we can stand behind as elected officials to say, look, this is making a difference. This isn't just a pie in the sky idea. This is grounded in actual strategies that are making improvements and that are being as impactful or perhaps even more than some of the policing strategies that we've had. I will also say that I know that our police officers also rely on a lot of these programs and efforts because they themselves acknowledge that some of these issues they will never be able to resolve through a policing angle, such as the chemical dependency issues, folks who are struggling to find permanent homes, the lack of economic opportunities that we see in some of our districts that lead to some of these challenges. So the creation of this Office of Violence Prevention under your leadership is really going to leave a very positive imprint in city government, and it's the types of system change that will outlive your good leadership, my good leadership, the rest of ours here, and I think that that's really beautiful. I think that's how we want to make sure our communities grow, and that's the kind of support we want to throw behind them. I thought I was going to say something else, but communications. So on that note, we should really make sure that we're tapping into the communications department to announce some of this work and also help folks understand that even though the Collaborative Safety Strategies program may not be moving forward in the way that it was or how it was felt before, that we're not giving up on that we're going to give this more room to grow and to have an impact. And so just making sure that when we're communicating externally that we tap into the city resources such as our communications department, perhaps also
also the city coordinator's office if there's some intersect, and definitely the health department, to figure out what kinds of stuff we can say in our newsletters and so forth to really help our residents understand the continuity of this work, the connections, and how we can keep building on those lessons learned and on the work that's happened before. So, mil gracias por el trabajo.
Thank you. I want to ask Deputy Chief Forrest to join us for a moment. There were some questions while you were gone that it didn't seem appropriate to ask Ms. McPherson. One of them was a notable one from the Council Vice President, and she talked about the importance of investigations. Part of the intention behind the mayor's budget here was to put these sworn officers that were in these previous civilian positions into the investigations unit. And I could ask her to restate her question. In summary, it was about would we be able to do these kinds of investigations through the health department with civilians? And if that's not your intent, Council Vice President, could you help correct me?
Well, I'm hoping, I guess my question was more, will the Office of Violence Prevention be inclusive of investigating sexual violence crimes by professionals, police, not necessarily in the health department, but working in collaboration with the Office of Violence Prevention to provide more investigative capacity around sexual violence?
I see. So Deputy Chief Forrest, I know you've just walked into our conversation. This very multifaceted amendment before us ultimately reduces the appropriation to the police department by over $1 million. Over 90% of that is ongoing. And so what this effectively does is it takes the mayor's recommendation to put sworn officers back into the precincts, into the community. And I think the intent would be to keep them then in these positions. Is that correct? I'm looking at one of the authors of this to verify that.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
It would be to keep these 8 sworn officers in the civilian positions that they're in today. Thus, no increase to the sworn officers on the street. And I will ask Councilmember Fletcher to clarify that.
Thank you, Chair. So we're deleting a change item that would have dedicated civilian staff to that. So it is not directive of how Chief Arredondo uses the budget that he has. But presumably, if those 8 positions are mission critical and that's the place that he wants to dedicate those staff, that is where he will leave them.
Okay. Another piece of this motion requires or directs the rollout of the mental health co-responder program citywide, which we learned yesterday would take additional sworn FTEs. But it seems only in the number of 2, is what Ms. McPherson said. So, Deputy Chief Forrest, I'm sorry to have pulled you up here. It doesn't seem like there's a question about how investigations would work. Could you potentially on the fly theorize how our investigators could work with an Office of Violence Prevention to work on things like sex crimes and that sort of thing, or how an Office of Violence Prevention might work in collaboration with your department?
Yes, thank you for asking me up here. And I'll see what I can do to answer kind of a multifaceted question. Quite frankly, when it comes to investigations, we do need more investigators. I mean, especially in the realm of sex crimes, you've seen there's so much concern and there's so much room for growth that we as a criminal justice organization can do in sex crimes. And clearly, a partnership with an Office of Violence Prevention does have a role in that. I know that we have been working very steadfast with inviting and hiring an advocate to come work on the front end, cooperating and collaborating with the Hennepin County Attorney's Office to have a prosecutor assigned to work and co-locate with our detectives. And so from that perspective, we're really looking at a front end of services and outreach and how we're attending to victims, to our training, to having prosecutors be there to help review cases, but it doesn't change the volume of cases that are coming in. And sadly, there's a tremendous volume. Forcible rapes alone are generally around 600 a year, and that's not all that the unit looks at. There's a multitude of other sex offenses that the unit handles as well. So from that regard, staffing is key, because in this day and age, with more technology, with more advances and things that can be looked at, each investigation takes so much longer, because the expectation is that every stone will be turned over to look at these things. I see, from my perspective, the Office of Violence Prevention really helping to prevent things from coming down the pike. We always say in the realm of special crimes with child abuse and domestic abuse that the victims of today are tomorrow's perpetrators, because violence has such a systemic and historic impact. And I think that where the true value of the Office of Violence Prevention will be in how we can work together to prevent tomorrow's crimes from even occurring. But from my perspective, from the Bureau of Investigations, there's still the now, and there's still the very real need to put as much as that we can into looking into these cases.
Thank you. If there are other questions for you, we'll call you back up. But if you would stay here in the room, I'd appreciate it. Councilmember Fletcher, did you have more that you wanted to add?
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. And thank you to all of my colleagues for your thoughtful consideration of this. And I want to especially respond to Councilmember Goodman. I apologize. And it is 100% on me as a colleague. There is nobody's office that I did not stop by, but I didn't happen to catch you, and that's not an excuse. I have your phone number. I should have talked to you, and I do value the way that we've worked together on the downtown safety work, and I hope that continues. And I want to specifically invite everybody, especially Councilmember Goodman and colleagues who haven't had a chance to look at this as closely, to continue to work with me. We had a choice between, we could have left this to the very end, and I'll say in my time on the council, in my first month, I spent a lot of that time answering questions about the stuff that happened at the very last minute in the budget cycle last time. And so it was my feeling that getting this forward today so that we could respond to it, so that people could see it and have a chance to look at it out in the open through this discussion was the right thing to do. So I am excited to move it today. I think it's the right thing. I am still open to amendments if there are additional or different ways that people would like to invest in violence prevention. The important thing to me about this is that we created a sense of the council, and I think that we have a sense of the council, that this council is interested in investing in community safety and violence prevention strategies that are not limited to the MPD. And I think we want people to see that. And we are, I think, hopeful that this is an invitation to the community to start bringing forward more of these strategies. I think this is something that we want to develop momentum on. And this is also in thinking about the meeting that we had yesterday, where we unanimously approved the reappointment of Chief Arredondo. One of the things that we all talked about was the chief's real commitment to community strategies and real commitment to violence prevention and working with the community both inside and outside the MPD. And so for there to be an outside, we have to fund it. We have to make investments in it. And so this is a way for us to get serious about saying this council believes in community safety, and that's something that we're going to move on. So I am excited about this. I appreciate the momentum that it feels like we have here on the dais around an idea that we can think bigger than some of the traditional strategies that we've used and get creative and start to do more. The other thing that I want to say is that I think there is an opportunity to just name the elephant in the room, right? Which is that I think in the presentation of MPD's budget, of course, they want to grow, right? And they're saying we have staffing needs. We'd like to allocate people to sexual assault investigation. And there are 888 sworn officers. And I think if we want to find 4 who we can assign to investigations, we should think about a way to do that. I don't believe that we have to increase the number of sworns in order to do that. I think that we have a number of staff who can be assigned to different priorities. It would be less than 0.5% of the staff in order to do that. And so I would encourage everybody to think about how we can allocate resources, how we can prioritize sexual assault investigations more. I think that's a good idea. But I don't think that this budget amendment precludes us from doing that. And I want to just emphasize that we should be continually looking at resources, continually looking at priorities as we think about how we do community safety, including MPD.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to just quickly go back and talk about investigations from a public health perspective. So we talked yesterday briefly during the chief's reappointment about the culture within MPD of this alpha male, alpha female sort of culture. And so, I don't mean to get too abstract or academic, but it's a little bit concerning that we continue to rely on a misogynistic system to investigate crimes that primarily happen against women and femmes, and I have a little bit of apprehension around the idea that having more investigators will address the fact that we have reports of people who were never contacted in the first place. But what does work and how we can build capacity from the public health approach is thinking about not just prevention, so helping to prevent sexual violence. I mean, so thinking about preventative measures in the health department, there's work in the adolescence division around healthy relationships for young people, and sexual violence is something, and consent, for example, are things that are discussed. Thinking about intervention, I think we're actually, while the office is the Office of Violence Prevention, we removed the "and" intervention because it was a mouthful, but also it's about intervention as well. And so I think that's really where this would come in, is the public health approach. So that would look like being able to have, there was the conversation about advocates. So having advocates, increasing that capacity, folks whose full-time work is working with victims and survivors of sexual assault, and domestic violence, for example, to be able to have those folks go out and be the interface with the community, because there's maybe a greater safety established. So just thinking about that is also a way for us to expand capacity around investigations, is thinking about how do we bring in more folks who have the expertise of helping unlearn violent behaviors, helping to cope with trauma, while also moving through the criminal justice system aspect of the sexual violence or the domestic violence that took place. And so, because I also would like to see more investigators in the domestic violence unit. They do really great work, and want to be able to support them. And I think that one of the ways we could do that is through the domestic violence outreach program, building capacity, making that permanent, so that we are thinking about a layered approach again to even investigations, because investigations is a component of when crime and violence takes place. And so I just wanted to help bring that into the conversation so that it doesn't feel so either or, but it's actually a both and. It's possible to grow the capacity and to do so through a public health approach. And so without overly relying on MPD to have to do all of the aspects of the work, where maybe an advocate or a specialist would be better suited to be able to do the interfacing aspect with the community.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't get into as much stufful detail as Councilmember Cunningham did, just since he's so deep in this work. But I wanted to highlight a couple things. Number one, I do want to note that every year that I've been on the council, where we've added millions of dollars in investment in the police department, council members have asked about adding more capacity to investigations, particularly for sex crimes. And I won't name the council members because some of them aren't here anymore, but that is not a new conversation. And I think there's definite will and interest in the council in shifting resources to aggressively pursue sex crime investigations. And I actually appreciate Councilmember Cunningham's thoughts about the collaborative nature of that. And that is, again, not new as well. The city attorney's office and the police department have already been collaborating closely on that work. The other thing I wanted to say is, we're asking our police department, along with many other departments in the city, to go through change. And, it puts departments in a little bit of a predicament when they're asked to comment on things that are really policy decisions. It's the decision of the Minneapolis City Council how to prioritize funding in the budget. And we, of course, rely on our departments for their expert opinion. And, of course, all of them are going to stand up and advocate for the resources that their department needs. But I really appreciated Deputy Chief's thoughtful comments about the impact of violence prevention and the overall strategy that we're doing. And that is, again, not a new sentiment. Chief Arredondo and the leadership of the department, I think now more than ever, is so committed to working collaboratively with the health department, with civil rights, with our city attorney's office. And leading through change is really difficult. It is very hard. And I think we all see and appreciate that. And so a policy shift in moving funds to violence prevention strategies that the council thinks is a high priority is absolutely not intended to be to pit the departments against each other or the work against each other. The collaborative work is really important. But we also see the police department sort of struggling through this change. And if you look at things like, the chief responded very quickly, but we have police resources going to marijuana stings and looking at low-level offenses still in the city of Minneapolis this year. And so I think absolutely the department should shift its resources away from things like that into investigating sex crimes. So part of it is looking at the resources we have, not just in MPD, but in every department in the city, and making sure that it's still aligned with the values and the direction that we're trying to go as a city. And I commend the department for the hard work that's happening in navigating and leading through change. But again, I think it is really the will of this council to make a more significant investment in the upstream strategies led through the Office of Violence Prevention to make sure that we're really making a significant and meaningful investment in this work.
Councilmember Ellison?
I wasn't going to mention this because I wasn't sure if it was real, but I've since gotten a confirmation from a community member that it was. As we're discussing sort of the cultural change that we're asking departments to go through, I think that we're feeling that really on the ground in North Minneapolis, especially. I know that everyone in the city is feeling that. But this morning I woke up to constituents who are upset about the decorations of a Christmas tree at the 4th Precinct police station. And for those who are not privy to what's going on yet, there was a Christmas tree in the police station this morning that was decorated with Takis bags, pack of Newports, malt liquor bottles. And that is the type of thing that I think when community members are saying they don't feel safe in this police department, when community members are saying they don't feel supported by this police department, and when community members are saying we need different strategies for violence prevention, this is the type of thing that really instills fear in a lot of people in the community. And so again, I'm not here to try to stoke outrage or anything like that, but when I woke up this morning, I almost didn't mention it here because I wasn't even sure if it was real. And had to get confirmation from community members who walked into the precinct and confirmed that it was real. And so I think that this move it's not the move that a lot of community members want to see in terms of divestment or people who have lost faith in the department. But I do think that it's a step in the right direction. It's a proactive step, not a punitive one, that still points us towards public safety. And so just wanted to name that and voice my frustration with, as we have to experience the growing pains of culture shift, that is the type of thing that community members are seeing, and it's the type of thing that I think the department really needs to address as we move forward and figure out investments in our NPD in the future. So thank you.
I do want to point out that the mayor has shared with me this morning that the person that created that in the 4th Precinct station is in the process of being terminated. Councilmember Warsami.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm absolutely disgusted by what we just heard. And thanks to Council Member Ellison for letting us know. I have no idea. And that should actually be investigated because it just highlights the culture within the MPD that many of us are against, many of us want to change, and that it has been resistant to change for a long time. I'm going to support this motion by Councilmember Fletcher and Cunningham. And, you know, it's a good piece of legislation, I must add. If you look at item E, it's as if they were channeling what I was thinking, and some of the amendments that I'm going to bring forward in the next items that are coming up. I mean, the 40,000 for youth coordination board in Cedar Riverside and Seward. I think it was a deft move on behalf of Councilmember Fletcher and Councilmember Cunningham and Councilmember Gordon, who kind of suggested it. And this is in line with some of the discussions that I've had with mothers who are organizing themselves in Cedar Riverside against violence, against crime, and against drugs, and young youth members, you know, 18-year-old, 20-year-old leaders in Cedar Riverside who have come together and who've actually highlighted the problem that we cannot police our way out of the issues in that neighborhood or in Ward 6 or in South Minneapolis, and who've said the underlying cause is there are no youth programs in Cedar Riverside. For a neighborhood that has the largest concentration of young people anywhere in the state of Minnesota, there are not enough programs. There's no after-school programs. There's no mentorship programs. There are no youth programs that keeps young, vulnerable individuals out of trouble. And the community has a lot of assets. You know, the community has social capital. The community wants to take care of its homeless. The community wants to take care of, you know, some of the issues around, you know, public safety. And, you know, I commend the council members for addressing this. I commend them for putting together this in the way they have done. And I think this is a step in the right direction, that we should empower community members to take care of public safety. And we should have a police department that is responsive to the needs of the community. A police department that does not shoot, you know, black men, and a police department that makes sure that, you know, a 21st century police department, not, you know, a police department that does what we just heard in the 4th precinct. That's unacceptable.
Okay, that completes the speaker queue. Without anyone further, Councilmember Fletcher has put forward a public safety omnibus amendment. It is the Fletcher-Cunningham Public Safety Omnibus Amendment. All those in favor, please say aye.
Madam Chair, may I ask for a roll call vote for this item?
That would be fine. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Reich is absent. Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Warsami.
Aye.
Goodman.
No.
Jenkins.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson is absent. Chair Palmisano.
No.
We have 9 yeas and 2 nays.
Motion carries. The next is, I'm sorry, if you can, item number 5, we're going to move to in our regular packets, unless there's a substitute motion here that blows this next one out of the water. Councilmember Gordon, I'll turn it over to you.
I'm not anticipating a substitute for this one, so hopefully there isn't one. This is a motion that deals with the 2 health inspectors. Folks who were around last year's budget will recall that we maintained some funding for health inspectors for our food, lodging, and pools division in the health department with one-time funding. I was hoping that this would be an ongoing funding item this year, but the mayor didn't put that in the budget, and I was unable to find that. So this is using some unspent funds from another purpose, had to do with the development of a new contract compliance system, so that we can fund these 2 currently working health inspectors at least for 1 more year. This will give us time to complete a study that's going on right now, a larger study. At least there's money in the budget proposed right now, $50,000, I believe, to do a study on regulatory services to get a better handle on, are we doing too many inspections or enough? Is there some efficiencies that we can meet? We certainly heard at the committee level the importance of these, and we've seen some real big improvements in our, especially restaurant inspections and how we're handling that. And I don't think we can afford, I don't think it's wise anyway, for us to lose these inspectors. Just for the details, this would amend the 2019 mayor's recommended budget for the health department, transferring $220,000 of a fund balance in the, and this number is wrong, so I want to change it to 06400 rather than 06100. That's the correct number of the fund associated with the development of a contract compliance system and increasing the health department's appropriation by $220,000 one time, including 2 full-time equivalents for a new food, lodging, and pools inspection change item in the health department. The health department shall then retain 2 existing health inspectors in the Food, Lodging, and Pools Division on a temporary 1-year basis. These positions shall not be considered part of the current service level budget for the Health Department in years 2020 and beyond. Happy to take any questions or comments on that amendment.
Thank you. So Councilmember Gordon has moved markup item number 5 with the one amendment being that it's in the 6,400 fund, not the 6,100 fund. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That item carries. Item number 6 is also Councilmember Gordon's, and I'll let you explain item number 6.
Thank you very much. Item number 6 is really changing one page. So there's a page with a big spreadsheet. This has to do with our 5-year financial directions. And I want to add an item on this that wasn't in the mayor's proposed budget, which would be to add, it's kind of 2 items, but it would deal with the future of neighborhood funding programs and the future of our NCR engagement services. So this is wouldn't impact the 2019 budget at all, but it would at least put in the budget book that we are earmarking, or we're keeping in mind we're having a projection that we anticipate in the direction moving forward that will continue to fund the work that we're funding now. The numbers used would be at the same level that we are now, so that's kind of a placeholder. These are big decisions that will be coming up next year as we deal with the Neighborhoods 2020 and the future of neighborhoods and the future funding for our department as that tax increment financing district will also get decertified. That's been funding both of those operations so far. I can read the amendment for folks to get added clarity on that. This would amend the 2019 mayor's recommended budget by increasing assumptions for future spending in the general fund as shown in the 5-year financial directions in the following ways. Increasing spending for one-time change items and transfers out by $3,500,000 in 2020. Adding an ongoing fixed $4 million expenditure beginning in 2021 for neighborhood funding programs, adding an ongoing expenditure beginning in 2021 for NCR engagement services of $3 million adjusted each year thereafter for current service level inflation, and updating the projected property tax levy as necessary to fund the increased investments as outlined for each year in the 5-year plan. I'm happy to stand for questions, and I'm sure the Finance Office can add any details that somebody wants as well.
Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm supportive of this, and actually I think it's great when we try to be more planful and look out past the year's budget that we're talking about into our 5-year financial projection, something the chair has been talking a lot about too. I do just want to note that this is one other policy area, and I don't want to get too much into policy in the budget, where if you try to suggest that we need to do a better job, you're often framed as being someone who doesn't support the function at all. And I represent a ward that's 80% renter, and for years, the neighborhood organizations in my ward have said it's just impossible to engage with renters. And that's just not a fact. The fact is when neighborhood organizations become more open and welcoming to renters and make it an intentional part of a strategy in a neighborhood, some of which in my ward are 90% renter, folks do come and get engaged. In the neighborhood that I live in, is 90% renter, and now it has 6 out of 11 board members who are people who happen to be renting their homes. And that's, again, after years of struggling with the organizations to even just make it an inclusive place where renters can feel like they can come and even attend a meeting without leaving feeling like they're completely unwelcome in their own community. And so I am supportive of this funding, but I just want to say the time has to end where we say, gee whiz, it's just too hard to engage with renters or students or people of color or the folks who live in our communities, and we just have to do a better job with the millions of dollars we spend every year engaging with community to make it inclusive. And if our neighborhood organizations need more support, we should give them the support they need. If something goes beyond the capacity of our mostly volunteer-run neighborhood organizations, then it should be the responsibility of the city through our NCR department or in other ways, which we may need to fund to make sure that we're reaching people, but we have to stop saying it's too hard. It's not too hard, and we've seen examples all across the city. Many of my colleagues have led these efforts in their own communities. So, my support of continuing to fund neighborhood organizations is contingent on us stopping saying it's too hard and making a commitment to do better.
I want to really appreciate what my colleague Lisa Bender just said. Not only are we part of looking at this, looking at things like the 5-year financial plan and some of the work that we've been doing and having conversations about with the Board of Estimate and Taxation and the Park Board and the Charter Commission for the future. But I have 3 initiatives going on that are all around communications at the city and how we engage renters better, how we engage every resident of our city more impactfully. One of those is a small staff direction at the end of this exercise. One is to work with our innovation team on how we really can do better with citywide initiatives across our city enterprise. And the other is attached to our comprehensive plan and how the implementation of that works. So I just can't emphasize more the importance of that in the Council President's words on this. That said, I did want to ask either Councilmember Gordon or perhaps more aptly the Budget Director what kind of an impact this has from a base percentage point for the next couple of years, because while I appreciate the foresight, I am concerned that we are making a commitment to something that we haven't had the conversation about, and I believe that conversation is scheduled for next year.
Madam Chair, appreciate the question. So in the mayor's recommended budget, the 5-year financial direction plans for a property tax increase of 6.05% for 2020 and 7.36% for 2021, which are the years primarily impacted by this amendment. As the proposed 5-year financial direction shows in front of you, that would go to 7.02% for 2020 and 8.23% for 2021. So roughly adds a percentage increase to the planned property tax levy for years 20 and 21. The out years would reduce, the percentage increase would reduce slightly.
Thank you. I'll point out that that makes me uncomfortable, and I'm not ready to make that kind of a commitment in the future when we haven't yet had that conversation. So I'm not going to be able to support this amendment, but perhaps my colleagues are. Councilmember Schrader.
I will be supporting this amendment, and I think I think everyone brought up some really great points about how we are going to be asking more of our neighborhood boards and making sure that we're doing that outreach. But one thing, and the reason I'm supporting this, is that we have neighborhood boards that have been giving value to our communities for decades now. We've had people that are looking at our budget, they're looking to the future, and there's a lot of uncertainty. And these are folks that have been volunteering their time in their neighborhood, for some of them for decades. They are very aware they need to do better, and they need to be more inclusive and more aptly reflect their neighborhoods. But what I like about this is that it is able to say that we still will have that conversation, but we are talking about funding neighborhoods. We're not talking about defunding, and that gives them kind of some idea that that's the direction we're heading.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I almost take issue at the characterization that this in and of itself is what's going to raise taxes. We always have the ability to take out this amount of money from somewhere else, and I would argue we should be doing that because we really should have a zero-based budget system where everything everyone does is reviewed as to whether or not it makes sense and then added to the budget rather than suggesting everything we do is great and here are the more things we can do. So I don't like having neighborhoods pitted against property taxes. And so I think it's really important for the folks who are volunteering their time in neighborhood organizations to understand that what we think they're doing is important. We think that there should be changes in the way they do it. In the ward I represent, the Loring Park neighborhood, the downtown neighborhood, the Elliott Park neighborhood, all work really well with renters, as an example. So, and others probably in the city do not. There are changes that probably have to be made, but to suggest that neighborhoods are going to cause this big percentage increase doesn't make sense to me. Adding $7 million of something to our 5-year projection will increase taxes. I assure you that if we want to solve our affordable housing problem, further increasing taxes will not help with that. In fact, it will hurt with that. And so when we're thinking about property taxes, we should be thinking about how renters pay more even than homeowners, and they will get pounded if we continue to raise property taxes in this way, and maybe we should talk about reducing some of the things we do. But I believe neighborhoods are an important component of what we're doing, and we should give them the recognition that we need to do something about this in future budgets.
Thank you. I am going to interject here and say I agree with everything that you say, and I wanted to ask Director Innermill for clarification.
Yeah. Madam Chair, to Councilmember Goodman's point, to clarify, the 5-year financial direction itself is a planning document, and it's not appropriating any dollars in those out years. The only dollars that are being appropriated, the only taxes that are being levied are for 2019. And so to the council member's point, council always has the choice to follow the plan, or spend more or less than is contained in that document. So it's a point well taken, and I did want to make that clarification for the record.
Madam Chair, I appreciate the clarification. I think what Councilmember Gordon is trying to do is simply to say, hey folks, we got a $7 million want, need, and necessity out there. Be aware of it, because we're probably going to have to reduce other things in order to accommodate this. But we believe neighborhoods are important, and it's worth doing that work to do that. That's what I view Councilmember Gordon doing here, and I am a partner with him in that work.
Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much, and I am saying that. I'm also saying I think, oh goody, we're going to have an enormous tax increment financing district end, and all that money is going to pour into the general fund. So of course we're going to see a percentage increase in what we're getting from property taxes in the general fund. And, oh, we've been using that so far to pay for our department and do engagement services. We'll probably want to be continuing to do that. So let's acknowledge that in the 5-year financial direction. So I want people to, when they see that 8%, that doesn't mean all the property taxes everybody's paying individually are going up 8%. That's or 7.2 or whatever. That's accounting. Part of that will. Now we would have the option, instead of putting all that money into the general fund, to be collecting less from people and giving. I mean, I don't want to play around like we wouldn't have an option of lowering taxes with the TIF district sunsetting either, or shrinking our levy. But I do want to raise the point that this is money that we're already getting. It's just set aside in the TIF district, and now it's going to be going to the general fund unless we decide we want to decertify it and we keep that with property taxes. And we can play around with it at different levels, but I think this will give us some stability into the future, but people will understand there's at least a plan to account for it. And of course, we can change this financial direction in next year's budget and moving forward.
Thank you. That's why we have discussions up here. I am comfortable with that as a value statement of this is something that we are going to look at and work in other ways to make this projection not look scary. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate all of the discussion about transparency, and that's why I think this is helpful, is to have this in the financial projections so we can understand how much might be offset by TIF or start to understand what the trade-offs might be. I just want to note that I don't think a vote on this indicates necessary support for allocating these funds in the future, and I want to be clear that that's what my vote is about right now. I will not support a program for public engagement that does not explicitly address inclusion with a frame of race equity and age and homeowner status and renter status and all those other things. And our staff are working very hard on that. So I don't take this as an intention to preempt that important work that NCR is doing with many council members, including Councilmember Gordon, who brought this. So I think, this isn't sort of a test vote on neighborhood organization funding, but rather I think a move toward transparency to understand how this will impact our budget and the kinds of trade-offs we may need to make. I can't support raising property taxes on cost burden renters in the 10th ward if neighborhood organizations are explicitly disenfranchising renters in their community. That would be a crazy vote to take, and I would never take that vote.
Thank you for bringing that out. Seeing nobody else in the queue, all those in favor of this motion by Councilmember Gordon, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Colleagues, not to break Councilmember Gordon's run here, and the next one is also under his authorship, but I did want to offer some time for lunch. And
I could do this very quickly.
I'm sorry?
Number 7 could be done in a minute, because I want to move to delete it because it's already been covered in the omnibus bill.
Oh, let's continue then. Councilmember Gordon.
I'd like to move to delete number 7 since this was accommodated in an earlier amendment, the famous omnibus amendment.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Now, colleagues, with your permission, we're going to take a brief break for lunch, and I'd like to keep on going and get through the rest of these as soon as possible after lunch. Would 40 minutes be acceptable to those here? Does anybody here think they need a full hour? Please let me know. Terrific. Then we'll do 40 minutes and we will reconvene here at 12:40. Thank you. Welcome back. I will reconvene our budget committee for budget markup, and I think that this afternoon will go quite a bit more quickly than this morning had. With me here at the dais are council members Cunningham, Gordon, Ellison, Warsame, Schrader, Bender, Fletcher, Cano, and Gordon. We have a quorum and are authorized to do the business of the committee. Again, I wanted to point out that Councilmember Johnson unfortunately can't be with us this afternoon, but he is watching remotely and is keeping track of these things. He is dealing with a medical situation at home. So the next in our packets is an amendment from Councilmember Cunningham, and it's in regards to the shot spotter cameras and expanding them. So I will turn it over to Councilmember Cunningham to make that motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify for my colleagues, in the 4th Ward, there are 2 neighborhoods that are not covered by ShotSpotter, which means that it requires for people to call, residents to call into 911 for that data to be collected, as well as for there to be an emergency response to it. So by putting this allocation in, we will be able to cover a good swath of that land that's currently not covered by the shot spotters. And in particular, I just want to name that we've seen a significant increase in gun violence in one of the areas that actually does not have any coverage. And so this is a huge issue for community members. So again, wanting to make sure folks feel safe. And with that, I would like to make this the motion for this amendment, amending the 2019 mayor's recommended budget for the departments of police, reducing the ongoing appropriation for the body camera interface to 911 CAD change item by 75%, and adding a new shot spotter expansion change item in the police department, including appropriations of $65,000 ongoing and $10,000 one time. The police department shall use these funds to expand the shot spotter coverage area by approximately 1 mile.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? I do have a question and then potentially a comment. I'd like to ask Director Intermill, this is about reducing an ongoing expense, $75,000, but then including appropriations in the amount of $65,000 with $10,000 one time. Can you help us understand how this came about?
Madam Chair, I hesitate only because in my work with all of you and the mayor, I value not sharing private conversations, and so I'll give you an answer, and if Councilmember Cunningham would like to expand on that, I welcome him too. So with respect to converting ongoing dollars to a one-time use, that is certainly fair game within our budget rules. There would be a concern if we were to be moving one-time dollars to an ongoing expense, that would put us in a structural imbalance place. But certainly from moving $75,000 ongoing to a $65,000 ongoing expense and a $10,000 one-time expense, there's no concern from a fiscal standpoint or a balanced budget standpoint for future years. With respect to the decision as to favor one item over another, I would defer to the council member.
Thank you. I think my question for you is purely financial, but I guess you're right that I should ask Councilmember Cunningham. Councilmember Cunningham, does $10,000 buy equipment or something and $65,000 makes it permanent, or can you help me understand what a $10,000 one-time but $65,000 ongoing achieves with the shot spotter expansion change item?
From my understanding, I believe the $10,000 is for the equipment and the $65,000 is for ongoing maintenance and store. I'm not exactly sure, but like the ongoing needs of said shot spotter. But I would look again to Director Intermill to make sure that's correct.
And Madam Chair, Council Member, I believe that is accurate. I am trying as hard as I can to bring up the original shot spotter proposal from the MPD. I did just find that $10,000 is for the equipment and $65,000 is for the ongoing maintenance agreement to continue the operation of that item.
To keep it active in perpetuity,
Yes.
then per our budget. Thank you. What I am less comfortable about, I always have supported these measures, and I do appreciate council members in their own ward helping to identify these kinds of needs. What I am a little bit nervous about here is that it is reducing $75,000 of the body camera interface to 911 CAD, and I'm curious what that means. And Councilmember Cunningham, I'm sure you've had these conversations with our police department about this resource. So can you tell me, does this take a person out? Does it remove, what exactly are we removing here? What capability are we removing from the police department?
Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chair. So from the understanding that I have of this item, that it's not an FTE, and that it's additional technology that's currently at this point still optional. And so looking at the various priorities that we have, that I have as a Northside Council member in particular, that felt like a more urgent need in comparison to the technological needs. Essentially, it would help make the connection, this technology would help make the connection between 911 calls and body camera footage, which is something that's helpful. But ultimately, if there's gun violence that's not being consistently monitored and engaged with, the sort of the pieces of the 911 and body cam footage become a little bit less of a priority, I would say.
So then, are you saying that the body camera interface is technology that exists, but this expense was for its ongoing use and maintenance of this technology that we own?
Madam Chair, I do not believe that I think this would need to be a new change item. We have someone here as an expert on this who interstage right.
I welcome someone from the police department to help me with this question. I'm not sure if it's Assistant Chief Jost or Ms. McPherson. As you know, Ms. McPherson, I'm passionate about our body-worn camera program, and I'm just curious what we're doing here and what the impact is of this change.
Okay. Committee Chair Palmisano, sorry, I'm Brianna Pierce, so give me a second. The shot spotter, first of all, let me just clarify, the $10,000 of the shot spotter, the one time is an implementation fee, and the $65,000 is the ongoing yearly fee. And it's the same arrangement that we have with the current shot spotter, so it's just an extension of that contract. As far as the implementation for the body camera, that is a yearly fee as well. So it's matching up from the yearly fee within I think one was $75,000, and then the shot spotter is $65,000. So I don't know if I missed something, if that answers your question, or if you had additional questions beyond that.
So then, just to clarify, this specific item that's being removed was a new change item, because that's how I read the language here in this. And so is that your understanding too?
Yes, it is. I think that the AC can explain more about what the body camera was for, so that there's a comparison, if that's all right.
That would be helpful. Okay. Assistant Chief, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Madam Chair Palmisano and Council. So the shot spotter technology we're talking about is the interface between the CAD system and the body cam itself. So if an officer activates their body cam and they're on a police call, it would install the case number on the video. That's been an audit issue problem for us, that the officers have to manually type in the case number on each and every video. And if you have fat fingers, or if it's a small screen, you may not get the number correctly, because it's kind of like text messaging. And this automates that process, where if you activate your camera and you're on a call, it just puts it on there. We've been discussing some other alternative way to fund this, if possible, down the road, but that's really what the difference between the two technologies. Shot spotter expansion is a life safety issue, and the body cam issue that we're dealing with is a technology audit tool.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Does anyone else, pardon me, does anyone else have any questions or comments they'd like to make on this? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Item number 9 is Councilmember Warsami's amendment for 4-H purposes, and I will turn it over to him to make that motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm amending the 2019 Mayor's recommendation budget for the City Coordinating Department on a one-time basis, increasing the strategic partnership change item by $80,000 one time. City coordinator shall use these funds to contract with Kajug for a 4-H program in South Minneapolis. And if I may speak on this, just like I mentioned earlier, the lack of programming for youth in South Minneapolis in particular, but in general, but Cedar Riverside in particular, is causing us a great deal of issues with violence, with isolation, marginalization of our young community in that area. And the 4-H program, this will be a STEM 4-H program. You know, it aims to build skills like responsibility, resiliency, and hard work, which will help individuals throughout their life. And these type of programs designed by young organizations, I believe will give us a great deal of value, and love to have your support on it.
Thank you. That motion is made, and in the comment or question queue, I'll call on Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question for Councilmember Osame. Is this the sort of traditional 4-H program that teaches young people about farm life and farm animals and those kinds of skills, or is this a new updated 4-H plan program?
Thank you, Madam Vice President, for the question. And we've had these programs before, the city of Minneapolis with Kajog, and they're usually around STEM. So they introduce math, science, technology, IT, robotics, more urban-based STEM rather than the farming and the traditional agricultural base. And we've had it before. It's been very successful, very popular with young members of the East African community, and that's why we recommended to bring it up. And this actually came about through discussions that I've had at the Opportunity Center over the last 2-3 months with mothers organizing for change and youth in the neighborhood. And what came about is the lack of programming, lack of funding for programming. Brian Coyle Center, absolutely, you know, there's so many hundreds of young East African individuals who have no programming outside of school and no support. And I think this will kind of made me bring this type of program to the council.
Thank you, Councilmember Osame.
Thank you, ma'am.
Councilmember Kano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the 4-H program is actually for that the urban indoor farm project at Roof Depot. Just kidding. I just wanted to ask a question to staff about the $80,000 coming from the city coordinators department. What is that defunding? What is that taking resources away from? I'm just curious about the impact on the actual city coordinators division.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Kano, thank you for the question. So this doesn't take any money from existing partnerships. It adds money to that strategic partnerships change item. So the source of funding is our fund balance. When the mayor recommended his change related to the CAMA mass appraisal system, it essentially freed up $450,000 approximately of one-time funding. And so this amendment is using that money to add to the coordinators department. And as you look at the large spreadsheet in front of you that summarizes the packet, you'll see the source is CAMA savings, and that will hold true for the next two amendments that Councilmember Warsame offers, as well as the one offered by Councilmember Palmisano.
So is the 450 completely used up?
So, Madam Chair, Council Member, once we get through this list of amendments that had been pre-filed with the chair, there will be $218,000 of one-time funding available.
Let's get on that, Andrea. Okay, so that's good. I'm wondering if that should be reflected in the language. I just think we should just be transparent and clear with the community and where these sources are coming from, and I didn't see the source within here. Last is just a comment to our council colleagues is that it seems to me atypical to just pick out an organization and say, here, we're going to give you money for this without having an RFP or some kind of a public process of engaging around goals, metrics, the type of service that's going to be provided. So, if this is a practice we're going to get in on, I want in on that party too. I typically try to kind of shy away from that kind of thing, but I'm just pointing it out as something that's happening, and I would love more guidance on how that's going to happen in the future, because then I think we can all handpick groups and organizations that we want to give resources to. Thank you.
Anybody else with questions or comments for Councilmember Warsame? All right. All those in favor of this motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? That carries. The next item is also from Councilmember Warsame, and I believe that per the other piece of paper that we have in front of us, we got it a few hours ago, it has some handwriting on it, and it's written as 10. It's amended. I'm going to direct your attention to that and turn this over to Councilmember Warsame for this amendment on youth violence prevention.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm amending the 2019 Mayor's recommended budget for the City Coordinator Department on a one-time basis, increasing the strategic partnership change item by $80,000 one time. The City Coordinator shall use these funds to contract with community-based partners for youth programming in order to increase violence prevention activities in and around the Cedar Riverside neighborhood. And if I may speak to this.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the city of Minneapolis, since 2018, there has been 10 East African homicides perpetrated by other East African youth. It's been, since I've been on the council the last 5 years, the most difficult year in terms of homicides and shootings. And the community has come together. And again, what came about was the lack of youth programming in order to address violence, and the fact that, just like we have the theme today, we're not going to police our way out of these problems. Having extra police in Cedar Riverside is not going to solve the issue. So the youth came together and they wanted to do their own programming and design program mentorship, athletics, programs that keep them busy, that gives them a fruitful meaning to their and connects them to their neighborhood. And that's why we came up with this idea, and we are looking for support from the county, from the state, and as well as from other jurisdictions to increase the support for youth programming in Cedar Riverside. But we thought the city should play its role, should take a leadership role in it, since we are responsible for public safety, and come out with community-led public initiatives that are culturally appropriate and address their problems the way they see fit. So that's the reason why we came to this, and I would love to have the support of my colleagues on the council.
Thank you. I just want to pause here before I call on Councilmember Cunningham, who's in the queue, to ask, given the way the earlier amendments have gone, does it perhaps make sense for this money to then reside in the Office of Violence Prevention? Would that be a friendly amendment, or would you prefer to have it in the city coordinator's office?
I would prefer to have it in city coordinator's office, one, because that office, the coordinator, and our coordinator Nuri is Vandermeer is here as well. They know how to do these type of contractual agreements and programming. Okay. And also, this is not necessarily just about preventing violence. It's not just about public. I don't want it to be about just public safety. I want it to address the lack of programming as well. So yes, it is. The big aim is to reduce violence, but the overall arching aim is to bring more programming and attention to the needs of this community and this neighborhood. So I prefer it to be at the coordinator's office. It's much easier. We've done it in the past, and while this other department grows and gets the skill sets, I think for this moment we need to house it where it is.
Sounds good. I will leave it as written in front of you on the amended version for now. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to say first that I am grateful that I have the opportunity and at any opportunity to be able to stand in solidarity with the Cedar Riverside community, as well as my colleague at Councilor Warsame. For good systems' sake, I do think it actually is better for this to live in the Office of Violence Prevention, given it's specifically for youth violence prevention related activities. And much the same as with the community-led public safety strategies, those are not specifically just for theoretically public safety. They also I mean, they're basketball. Like, there's lots of different strategies around this, and so this would just be another strategy of violence prevention. I won't necessarily at this time make a motion on officially amending it, because I also do want to be respectful in terms of kind of like the vision, but I do want to name, though, that this is another violence prevention strategy, and if we want to do good governance, that we should start from a place of making sure violence prevention work is centralized in one location.
Thank you, Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the discussion, and as I was listening to my colleagues speak about this, I thought maybe since we had just had the amendment earlier today about the Office of Violence Prevention, it sounds like maybe Councilmembers Warsame and Cunningham just need more time to talk with each other and staff. And so I think if we approved the amendment as brought by Councilmember Warsame, there would still be time between now and next Wednesday to have those conversations and decide where this would live permanently, if that was amenable to the council members.
If I may,
Go ahead.
I respect both my council colleagues' comments, and I'm open to it. However, let's do it as it is now, and I'll seek further information and guidance. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon, did you popped in and then out of the queue?
I did.
And I didn't see you pop out until I called it. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Oh, well, I was going to suggest an amendment, and we could put the coordinator could work with the health department, and I'm unclear now whether if consensus is to table it or just to vote.
It is my intention, and it is Councilmember Warsame's intention to vote on this as it is amended in front of you now, with the idea that he's open to further conversation on it before next week.
All right, so I'll try to just be quiet then and anticipate some amendments next round to this item.
Thank you. Councilmember Connell?
What is the amendment? You mentioned that this is item number 10 and that there was an amended piece component to this. Was this the handout?
So the amended language in here
okay.
says youth programming in order to increase violence prevention activities. It's just clarifying language. But this amendment is similar to the one in your packets in that it's for the city coordinator's department on a one-time basis.
Okay. I cannot support this in the way that it's written now because it doesn't align with the city's broader work around youth programming, violence prevention activities. So it would just be, it would not be aligned with how we've been making decisions on this. I'm happy to look at a amendment next week and support that. I think it's great to have the resources go there, but as is, I just think it would be bad government practice to approve something that we know doesn't align, doesn't fit with the series of decisions we've been making earlier and the work that we're doing to align the work and really support it. It should not be in the city coordinator's office. So I can't support this as written, but if folks want to bring forward an amendment, I'm happy to support that.
Okay. Seeing nobody else in the queue or coming in and out of the queue, I'm just going to call a vote on this amendment as it is written in front of you and with the clarification language in it, and we can go from there. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Nay. That item carries. Next, we have a trades pilot program amendment from Councilmember Warsame, and I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm amending the 2019 Mayor's recommended budget for the Community Planning and Economic Development CPED Department on a one-time basis, adding a trades pilot program, change item, and increasing the appropriation by $50,000 one time. CPED shall use these funds to contract with community organizations or local businesses to develop and implement a trade pilot program. CPED is further directed to prioritize finding an additional $50,000 within existing budgetary resources to match this appropriation. And if I may speak on this as well.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a pilot program that we've been working with, that we started to design with the trades unions. And in order to one, diversify the workforce in the East African community. Two, to house this program at the Opportunity Center in Cedar Riverside. And three, to basically help the unions. As we are aware, Baby boomers are retiring. There's going to be a lot of pressure on skilled labor, and we need to prepare for the future. And one of the potential ways to fill this gap is by training and educating people of color and inner city workforce. And this pilot program, I think, would go a long way to address this issue. As you know, historically, the building trades have been one area that has been, kept people of color and black people away from, and I think we have an opportunity now to address these issues by training a workforce and diversifying the workforce and tapping into the potential of people of color in the inner city Minneapolis. And this is a start of that, and I would love to have the support of my colleagues.
Thank you. Anybody wish to speak or ask questions about this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item carries. Next is item number 12. Oh, that's mine. I will move forward a motion by just myself, and it is amending the 2019 Mayor's recommended budget for the Health Department on a one-time basis, increasing the Office of Violence Prevention change item by $30,000 one time. The Health Department shall use these funds to support the Police Athletic League program, including a transfer of funds to the Police Department if necessary. I'd like to speak a little bit about this item. PAL, the Police Athletic League, is something that currently operates. It has a civilian board of directors. There are volunteers from the community, and it runs out of our Hamilton police site, which was formerly an elementary school. In conversation with the board members for this program, they have some, but not a lot, of police involvement and support with this program, and what they think it would take to really be able to make this its own standalone program would be a small one-time amount of money such that they could hire an executive director who could begin fundraising for this program. It is a national program, the Police Athletic League. The purpose is to build strong community trust and partnerships between young people and officers, and this funding would be used just one time to achieve that purpose and give them an opportunity to get off the ground. This has been in operation for, I'm not sure how many years, Robin McPherson knows, but it seems that she stepped out, so I'm happy to answer any questions. But I guess I first better ask a clarifying question. Director Intermill, I noticed that on the spreadsheet in front of us, it says that it comes from CAMA savings, but the way that this motion is written, it looks as though it comes from the Health Department. So could you clarify that for me, please?
Madam Chair, to highlight the second sentence of the motion, this is to increase the Office of Violence Prevention change item by $30,000 one time. So it does indeed add $30,000 to the Office of Violence Prevention for this work. And so a source is not specified in the amendment itself because, again, the source of funding is the fund balance that was made available through the mayor's CAMA amendment.
Oh, I see. Yes, I was reading this incorrectly, but this is exactly how we've discussed this. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to ask a process question. I think it's a great idea to get a civilian in the position of an executive director for the PAL program. Inspector Barrett, actually, I think, used to be the executive director, but now he's the 4th Precinct Inspector. And it's tough for a sworn officer who maybe has never been trained in nonprofit management to be in charge of a nonprofit. So I think it's really great. I wanted to check in to see if there have been any conversations with the Health Department violence prevention staff to see what this sort of change will look like and how that will be built into the violence prevention efforts.
Thank you. I'll take that just as a question for myself. I don't know. I don't see it as being, I see it as being categorically about violence prevention, but this money would specifically be to hire an executive director that has development experience and leave it up to that board of directors of PAL that's been working in collaboration with the inspector over time and with, I'm sorry, her name escapes me, but Catherine Lund, I believe, is the person who's been working closely with this program over time, and I would leave it up to them to be able to use up to this amount of money to hire a part-time executive director and get started on making it its own standalone program. So while it would be connected to the Office of Violence Prevention categorically, this is just a one-time funding transfer, not an ongoing appropriation.
Madam Chair, if I may ask a follow-up question, so then would the PAL program then live on in the Office of Violence Prevention, or would it be still something that lives within the police department? I'm kind of confused as to where the Office of Violence Prevention comes in, and then to also hear that the $30,000 is coming out of the fund. Right now, we already have $150,000 of that earmarked for. It's not the same? Okay. I thought that's what I heard. It was that it was coming up.
Yep. Madam Chair, Council Member, to clarify, this adds $30,000 to the Violence Prevention Fund that then is to be used for PAL.
Okay, I guess my concern is just like process in terms of. Well, can you answer the question though about would the executive director work in the Office of Violence Prevention? I guess I'm just not clear where that fits into it.
Councilmember Cunningham, the executive director for this program would work for the board of directors of this nonprofit. It currently operates out of the Hamilton facility, and we know that time will come to an end, after which they'll have to find another facility to operate out of, and all of that would be unscoped and probably a few years out.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I just want to make sure that offline that we coordinate with the the violence prevention staff at the health department so that they understand what this means for them if they have to take on more work and things like that. So if we can just clarify so they're not panicked that maybe they have a new program that they have to manage, that would be really great for us to do. Thank you.
Absolutely, and please understand that my intent here was just to place this in an appropriate place. I could have, I guess, also put it in the coordinator's office to just be a transfer, but I felt like it was supposed to be here. Based on what I was seeing. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry. Could Finance repeat the statement that you made about the source of funds, because it says health here. And
Yep. Madam Chair and Council President, so what the result of the mayor's CAMA amendment, which was incorporated earlier into the budget through the technical amendment, what that did was create a $450,000 one-time fund balance available in the general fund. And so that $450,000 that was not assigned through this amendment is being added to the Violence Prevention Fund created earlier for the intended use of PAL.
And Director, we were speaking over you to the Council President, so did you want to hear that one more time? Okay. Sorry about that. All those in favor of this motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That item carries. Next, we have a motion by Council President Bender on a stable homes, stable schools staff direction.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is something that Councilmember Goodman and I are bringing forward together, and this should really be not controversial because it's actually kind of how we do business, but there's been a lot of confusion about the Mayor's Stable Homes, Stable Schools program. This simply directs staff in community planning and economic development to report back to the council early next year on the status of the program development. Our understanding from conversations with some of the partners who are involved in this is that it may be at a pretty early stage of planning, despite the intention of spending $3 million next year. So if the report is simply a status that it is in those early stages of planning, that would be fine. But I think council members just need a lot more information about the program, the number of students and families that will be served, the number of the schools that the school district has chosen to be included and why, so that we can just be included in planning that's happening in our wards. And then understanding about the goals and the impacts of the program and how it might fit into all of the other work that the council is leading around housing. And so this also instructs staff not to spend the money until we have a chance to get more details and approve a work plan for this work.
Thank you.
Maybe Councilmember Goodman wants to chime in.
If that's all right, yeah, Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like any other program in the city council has the responsibility as in the strong council system to lay out the specifics with regard to any program. I will say, I think it's probably a little harsh to suggest that no agreement can be made because agreements are already being made. So I probably would strike that language, but no dollars should be expended until we have a sense of what the work plan is. It sounds like Councilmember Gordon had sent out to housing policy folks a general outline of what they're thinking, and that's really good information. I also think it would be good to have this in front of committee. It sounds like the mayor's office has tried to do that in the past, I don't know, we weren't as receptive as we might have been. So it sounds like we should be receptive now since we're asking for the information and get a briefing in committee followed by some specifics about the work plan. But I would also just ask that we strike the language that says no agreement shall be made.
Can I just? If I might chime in, I think in this context, the word agreement is referring to a contract. For example, a contract with the Public Housing Authority for $3 million.
Yeah. Okay.
So we could replace it with contract or maybe financial agreement is the appropriate word.
I mean, they've already basically, unbeknownst to us, chosen the schools. So agreements have been made without question.
I think, again, it was contract or financial agreement. Yep.
So just not seeing a preference on which one, I'll just choose to say no financial agreement may be made, if that's good. Acceptable to the authors. So this motion will read no financial agreement may be made in that second to last line. Others who would like to speak? Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am going to vote in support of this motion because it's great to have the transparency and to get that information out so that folks know. As somebody who was a former teacher and special ed teacher in the public school system, I have been able to see firsthand really what happens when young folks are destabilized through being homeless and highly mobile. The research is just really, really clear that even one incident of homelessness can dramatically impact their academic achievement. And so I wanted folks to know that, so based on the list of schools that I saw, I think a majority of them were actually Northside schools. And so I reached out to connect with the mayor, and we're going to be partnering and working on this. So there will be a connection between the mayor's office and the council. And I look forward to working with my colleagues to increase the transparency and the conversation and make sure that this is a strong program that both the council and the mayor are 100% behind.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman, did you want to speak again? Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. I appreciate the staff direction. I was also comfortable taking out the no agreement may be made. I'll just note that the only concern that I see might be created with passing this is there'll be a level of uncertainty that might be created in our partners. So I think what should be clear is when we approve the appropriation of the funding, that should give a sounding bell to everybody to understand the city is serious in participating in this and they're moving forward. All we want is to get clarity, get more information, and to be able to sign off on the work plan before we actually send the funds out the door. So I think that's going to be an important thing for us to talk about. If we, this is assuming we approve the budget ultimately that does appropriate the funds for this purpose, because I do think they are near resolution on most of the issues out there. I also appreciate this because it sets the date of January 31st to at least come back to a committee and make a report. And I think that I would have been open to getting this at our committee sooner at one point or another. I also thought it was appropriate that individual committee members and council members get briefings, and I think there was some confusion about discussions I'd had with staff about getting it to committee and when. But I'll support this with, I think, the language that got changed to no contracts or no financial agreements.
Thank you. Again, we do have until next week and could bring forward any newly agreed upon language with the authors. I'd be happy to do that, or I'm sure the council president would be happy to do that. But for now, we'll leave it as is. Councilmember Cunningham?
If I may, Madam Chair, just very briefly, I have been doing research on this particular program, or the model based that this program is based on, and it's based on a school out of Tacoma, Washington. I read a 5-year analysis of 120 pages, full nerd. Read the 5-year analysis, and the results are very promising. Of course, with an innovative strategy, there are still gaps and needs, and I think that we have the opportunity to learn on lessons from other cities, such as Tacoma, for us to be able to do this right. So the research really does back this up, and I look forward to working with our colleagues to make this a really strong program here locally.
Thank you. Seeing nobody else in the queue, let's take a vote on this motion. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Next, we have the small packet of items that have just been handed out. It contains 3 last amendments. And the first one in front of you, it also has my name on it. And this is some of the things that we've been talking about. We've been talking about it actually as we've walked through the comprehensive plan this year. I'll read the staff direction and then explain a little bit of it. This is a staff directive directing the communications director and the innovation team director to contract with a qualified external communications audit vendor to conduct an enterprise communications audit to improve the overall alignment and effectiveness of communications and public engagement activities. And this is due to some of the ways that we have learned along the way of what public engagement in our city might look like on citywide initiatives. This communications assessment would provide an overview of the existing scope of communication resources across our enterprise and look at the effectiveness of those strategies. I really feel like some of these might just need to be refreshed and modernized. Sorry, I didn't want to editorialize. It would review the effectiveness of current and past communication strategies, capabilities, tactics, and structures. This communications audit would provide guidance and recommendations on how the city enterprise might improve the proactivity and diversity of communications in alignment with strategic enterprise goals so we can maximize our resources. I'd be happy to entertain any questions or comments. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm extremely supportive of this and very thankful for your leadership on what I think is just a needed, like you said, an analysis of how things are going, and just understanding how the different communications functions of our city are working together and how we may be able to improve. So I really appreciate this, and I'm supportive. I think it makes good sense for this to come, through the Enterprise Committee where you're the chair. So I appreciate your leadership.
Thank you. I'll mention that this audit intends to have an outside entity identify where our weaknesses lie in gathering engagement from diverse groups and individuals and provide recommendations on improvement. I don't think that that's a skill that our internal audit department has, which is why this would be an outside contract. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I assume that costs money. Is it budgeted for currently, or is there some financial component to the staff direction?
That's a good question, Councilmember, and in working with our city coordinator, our communications director, and our innovations team, my understanding is that they would be willing to do it within their existing base.
That's great. Thank you. I'm very supportive of this effort.
Seeing no further questions, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? That item carries. Thank you very much. Next, I will turn the page and invite Council Vice President Jenkins to introduce her staff direction.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am introducing a staff direction directing the budget office to develop a definition for work that is core to the provision of city services and provide recommendation to the council on how to categorize the city's work as core based on that definition in coordination with the strategic and racial equity action planning process. Staff shall report back to the council with recommendations no later than February 27, 2018. And I will move this and stand for questions or comments.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon?
So this raises a lot of questions for me. I don't quite understand what we're after, and if it's figuring out what are actual core city services for the city to provide. It seems like that's the job of the council to figure out, and it should be based on our goals and the mission of the city. Or if it's work core to the provision of all the city services, that's, I guess, more like setting the budget. So, and I don't even know if the budget, so certainly if it's what are core city services, and this is something we debate regularly every budget and all the time, and hopefully our values are helping us decide what's core and what isn't core and what isn't, then I don't even know if the budget office is the right place to go to expect us to develop a definition of that, when we certainly do have staff in the coordinator's office that's helping us look at our goals and values. And then it seems like it's so far reaching then to go into each department. How would the budget office do it? What do you consider your core service, department head and staff? And of course, so I'm not sure if what we're after here, and if the right way to get there is a direction to the budget and during the budget process. So maybe if more information will help me understand it better.
Councilmember Gordon, if I may, I had a couple of comments, and then I'll invite the Council Vice President to maybe make some other clarifications. You know, we've been talking all year about how to better dig into the city's current service level budget so we can better understand as policymakers where our budget's being spent. Personally, I've been working with both Micah Innermill, our budget director, and also Andrea Larson, our deputy city coordinator, on that effort. In order to make that work meaningful, we need to start by understanding all of the work the city does. And of that work, what is core to the services we're required to provide, and what is it that we choose to do on our own? We aren't saying that we'll only continue doing core work and that our discretionary work will go away. That's not what we're saying at all. We should do our core work as efficiently and effectively as we can, and I would say we should innovate that as well. Yet we should, as policymakers, be making collective, active decisions about which discretionary work we fund, and maybe not always at the end of the year in a rushed budget process. I think we need one central definition so we aren't leaning on each other's or each department's interpretation of what core work means. And does that help to answer what you're asking at all, or would you like some more clarification as to why this would sit in the budget director's office? And I guess I'll get out of the middle of this conversation.
So the word required was helpful. So we could find out what's required by state law or by our own city ordinances to do. That would be helpful. Core isn't very helpful, and required isn't in this. So what is required and not? And actually, I think what core services probably resides in each of us and each of the residents of Minneapolis. It probably doesn't reside in the budget office. Somebody could look up what's required by state and federal law, so we could look that up and get a report back on that, and that would be useful. So that, and the other thing was discretionary. So there'd be two piles: discretionary and required. And I'm not sure where the lines would be blurred or the difference would be made. We could look up what's in state and federal law and maybe what's in city ordinance, but obviously we pass the ordinances and we take a vote, and we could change that to discretionary if we think it's core. So it seems like a big wormhole that we could go down trying to figure out what this is and what the expectations are. And then we'd still have a big debate about that's I consider that's core to the future of the city and the health of the city. I don't consider it core, and I don't know. Maybe the budget office has a clear idea of what answer they'll come up, and it's simple for them to figure it out. But it seems like it's got to be based on what the policymakers feel is core, which is based on what we feel our constituents think is core or required for us to have the best city possible.
I might use the word core where you use the term required, but I think that that's what Council Vice President Jenkins' motion is all about, is coming up with an agreed upon definition of what core is. But I'll back out of this and invite the Council Vice President to make any comments she might want.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will yield to Councilmember Bender at this point, but just to reemphasize, your explanation is the intent of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you, Madam Chair. I do also want to express, two things. Number one, I actually agree that when we take a look at our now almost $1.5 billion budget, that we shouldn't assume that everything is in there is a priority or something that we want to continue. And that the way that we've been writing our budgets generally, or at least the way that they're presented to council, tends to rely on that assumption sometimes. Although certainly mayors and council members have cut things. But I also do want to agree with Councilmember Gordon that I think that defining core is probably more difficult than it seems at its face. And so while some council members may think that having 888 sworn officers is a core function of the city of Minneapolis, we certainly don't all necessarily agree on that, or a certain level of service about other things that we might assume are core versus things that we might may not have been traditionally part of what the city is doing, but council members in this council actually see as a core function of city government. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to, given the amount of interest that we're hearing about this from staff, have them come back and try to explain to us more about this as a body so that policymakers can see if it makes sense. But I do think that it's probably a lot more complicated than it sounds.
Councilmember Gordon?
So my assumption is then they're going to have to base their what they think is core based on the goals that were approved and the mission that was approved by the previous council. I suppose they could maybe look at the goals of our comp plan, but I don't know what they're going to base that on if they're really trying to figure out and kind of psych out what is core to this council. Or maybe they're going to look at what's in law and what are the ordinances that we've passed and what state and federal laws are requiring of us. But I just think it really would have been helpful if we actually had our goals and our values and our mission articulated before we're asking somebody to go back and figure out what's core. And so this is like putting the something ahead of something else, and it doesn't really make any sense. And I don't know how we're ever going to have that done by February 27th on the track that we're doing now. So I'll probably vote against this right now. I think the budget office has full discretion to develop some recommendations about core services and what they think are core or aren't core for us to look at anytime they want. But I think somehow we're punting now what should be our work, and I think we need to get our job done before we ask somebody else to come back then and start guessing what we think.
Councilmember Gordon, if I may, I'm going to turn this over to Director Intramural to say a couple of words, but this is, I think, the end result of all of the strategic planning work that is still going on, and a lot of the new calendar items on our schedules for January are meant to get us there. This is a process. This doesn't just leap forward. While I see that in isolation the staff direction might look like it, there's a lot of work that we'll be doing in January toward this effort. And Director Intramural, if you would like to interject.
I'll just note that February 27, 2018 is already over.
So noted. We'll change that to 2019. Director Intermo.
Madam Chair, thank you. So I think that Councilmember Gordon, as you so often do, you have touched on almost all of the sticky challenges that are part of this work. So to underscore something that the chair said, certainly the Budget Office has been working deeply with the City Coordinator's Office, the Division of Race Equity and Long-Range Planning throughout this, the Strategic and Racial Equity Action Planning process. And the intended last step was always how do we operationalize this strategic planning work? I think in the past, council has set good goals, but then there's always been a question of how do we connect the goals and the vision to indeed all of the work that the city does, which is funded then through, as the council president points out, our over $1.5 billion budget. And so my understanding of the council vice president's intent here is to say we need to get to that last step of operationalizing our strategic and racial equity action plan. And part of doing that is identifying what are our core services and what is optional. And I was just chatting with our city clerk here. A core service, an example may be providing conducting elections. Voter outreach is discretionary. That is not to say that voter outreach is not important. Indeed, it is, being here in the votingest city and the votingest state. But is that a core function of the city? That's the question. So to the specific staff direction itself, this is directing the budget office to come back with a recommendation to council on how to categorize that work. So the council continues to decide. The council sets the vision and mission of the organization and ultimately decides what's core, what's not. But then from that determination, then as elected officials along with the mayor, the discussion that you have about funding particular items becomes different. We take a look at how can we make a core service more efficient and still deliver the outcomes that are intended. We look at our discretionary programs. I think a good example is earlier the amendment that Councilmember Cunningham brought. These are two good things: the Shot Spotter program and the connecting our 911 system to our body camera database. But looking at those two optional items, both good as they are, against each other helps us understand helps you understand what the trade-offs are as policymakers. So that's, as I read this, that's the value I see, and certainly the budget office does not intend to dictate to council or departments what would be core or other, but rather to work with council and departments to bring a set of recommendations on how you, council, may do that.
Councilmember Gordon?
Well, I appreciate that, and you could, I guess, I still think core is a terrible word, and I don't understand what it means and how you're going to determine that. And I think even providing elections, there's a lot of towns that have the county do that for them now. So, I mean, we could decide that it's still going to be up to us. So I think there would be a better way to help us figure that out, and probably how do we operationalize your strategic plan would be very helpful. Help evaluate decisions based on your priorities would be helpful. So I'm not sure about support this staff direction as it is. It's probably going to have support though, and that's fine. And I'll probably keep sticking things up every so often when I feel like it. I do think it would be better if we had done our goals and our values and the mission of the city, and then I think we are also well equipped to look at those issues. And if we feel like we want every staff report to show us how it's connected to a goal, every budget request, every business plan from our departments, we could be doing that, and that would be our job, and it would help us make our decisions on everything that you brought to us to say, okay, that doesn't fit the goals that are my priorities or that we already approved, and it doesn't further the mission of the city, so it's not something that we're going to fund this year, or it does, and we will. So I don't know. But thank you for letting me take up so much time with this one little last amendment. Sorry for everybody.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Councilmember Gordon for highlighting once again the challenges of coming to consensus around some of the really essential work that the required work, the mandated work by the state government and our own ordinances, but this has been the challenge to getting to those mission and values that you speak of, and I absolutely agree that it would be better if at this time we had those things hammered out, but this is intended to help us with a definition to be able to streamline and get to that point early in January 2019 so that we can develop a roadmap of the direction we want this body to take over the course of this 4-year term. So I would encourage my colleagues to support this direction, and I would be, if you have other language that you think is more appropriate, I would certainly be willing to entertain that. Councilmember Gordon.
Seeing nobody further in the queue or with their flags up because they're out of the queue time, I'm going to move this forward for now with the one small change being a error where it says 2019 instead of 2018. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That item carries. The next item in your packet is a motion by Councilmember Ellison, and I'll turn it over to him to make that motion and speak on it if he wishes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This motion is amending the 2019 Mayor's recommended budget for the City Coordinator Department on a one-time basis, increasing the strategic partnership change item by $100,000 one time. The City Coordinator shall use these funds to contract with community-based partners to study ways to maximize investments in the Promise Zone. And just to give folks a little bit of context, the Promise Zone is a designation, a federal designation that stretches the length of almost all of North Minneapolis. And in the past couple of years, the role of the Promise Zones is not to get money we don't get resources from the federal government, but it does preference applicants within the Promise Zone in federal grants. And the city has, for a while, put some effort to helping small businesses in North Minneapolis and nonprofits in North Minneapolis to apply for these federal grants, which can be extremely complex. But we currently have one staff person who does that work with no budget. And so this would be giving that staff person a bit of a budget to be able to contract with folks who could help with grant writing. I initially wasn't sure where I was landing and hadn't done a lot of engagement early in the term with the Promise Zones, but as I've been able to engage and talk to business owners, notably Appetite for Change and James Staples and others who feel like they've gotten a lot of benefit, and that if there was additional support to help them navigate these federal grants, that Northside businesses would benefit from that. And so this would be a one-time allocation to allow for city coordinator to provide that additional support and help Northside businesses sort of focus in on a few key corridors. Some that come to mind off the top of my head is 44th, where Councilmember Cunningham has a lot of development that could go forward, and a lot of businesses that could be strengthened there. Plymouth Avenue, again, is another corridor over north, as well as West Broadway. And so, this is really just to support growth in the neighborhood. As we focus on housing, I also don't want to lose sight of economic development, jobs, and income as a factor in wealth creation. And I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. I don't see any questions at this time. Any questions or thoughts on this amendment? Okay, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That item carries. Next, in front of you, and handed out separately at the end, is a motion by Councilmember Cano, or an amendment from Councilmember Cano. I will turn it over to her to make that motion and speak on it if she wishes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This reads, amending the 2019 Mayor's recommended budget for the City Coordinator Department on a one-time basis, increasing the strategic partnerships change item by $100,000 one time. The City Coordinator's Office shall use these funds to support next year's ongoing work of the environmental and racial equity efforts known as the North and Northeast and Southside Green Zones work by the Office of Sustainability. And so, as many of you know, this work has been growing over time, and it is focused on helping areas of our city that have three specific demographics layered one on top of the other. So number one, these areas are the most low-income areas of our city. Number two, these areas are also the most racially diverse areas of our city, as well as the most polluted areas of our city. And so this allocation is actually smaller than last year's allocation. This would be supporting two regions, whereas last year we had a little over $100,000 going into both areas. And so we want to be able to continue this work specifically by helping partners come to the table to help us carry out both the north side work, which is happening at the task force level during the first phase of it. The south side work is now in the second phase, which is getting ready for implementation. And so we as a city should just continue to support that work. It's strategic, it's meeting our goals, it's very unique in the nation. And so supporting this is really important to make sure that we get these projects to fruition.
Thank you. I'm going to pause and ask our budget director, Mr. Intramural, it seems that we just passed an amendment that uses this money, and can you speak to the actual source of this funding? Or, and if you don't know, I can inquire with the person bringing forward this motion.
Madam Chair, I will speculate, and if I'm wrong, I invite Councilmember Cano to correct me. So when we finished our series of pre-filed amendments, there was $218,000 left from the, I'll call it CAMA surplus, former CAMA surplus. Of that $218,000, Councilmember Ellison's motion spent $100,000, and I believe then the remaining $118,000, it would be Councilmember Cano's intent to use $100,000. So if this amendment is adopted, we would have $18,000 left from the former CAMA surplus, for lack of a better term.
I see. Is that correct, Councilmember Cano? Correct. Thank you. Councilmember Gordon.
I believe he said it's CAM's surplus.
Councilmember, we offered to name this new.
Well, I dibs the last 18. I dibs the last 18. CAM's core service.
Are there any serious questions or concerns on this matter? And then just to indicate to my colleagues, this is the last one I have in front of me. So unless you start to chime in with others, this would complete our work today. Anyone? Anyone? All those in favor of this, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? This item carries. Colleagues, this completes the work that we have in. Oh, This completes the work we have in front of us right now, and Councilmember Fletcher has an item or a comment or something. I will give him the floor.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I just wanted to preview something that I intend to bring at our next meeting. I'm not bringing it today, both because I didn't have a chance to talk to people, and having apologized for doing that once today, I'm not going to compound that, but also because I'm very excited about what I'm going to be proposing, and I just want to preview it to start the conversation. We need more capacity in public works to coordinate around a vision around transportation infrastructure, specifically where there is a lot of new development contemplated. And one of the things we've been trying to make happen is more coordination between public works and CPED, and we need the capacity to do that. And I had a proposal ready to bring forward, and both Public Works and CPED contacted me and said we want to work together to find a different source for it. And in the spirit of trying to create collaboration between Public Works and CPED, I like that, and I want to see that move forward. So I'll be coming forward to you with a proposal for that, including a different source than I had anticipated when I woke up this morning when we convene next. Looking forward to those conversations.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? City Clerk, if I may just confirm this next motion with you, I believe what we need to do here is to approve this budget as amended and forward it to the next adjourned meeting next Wednesday. Is that correct? So I will make that motion to both approve the mayor's recommended budget inclusive of these amendments and move it forward to next Wednesday for the public hearing. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you. We will be adjourned, and this is adjourning this meeting to next Wednesday, December 5th at 6:05 p.m. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before we adjourn, I just want to thank you and your staff and your office for doing such a great job of managing all of the amendments that came through today and doing it with such respect for, each council member office's goals in mind, and working so collaboratively with all of us. It really mattered a lot, and to finance and all of the other department heads for all their work leading up into today, and to the clerk's office as well.
Thank you. We stand adjourned.